Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Windows on the World. This is our weekly Wednesday show. Today, I'm bringing back Jerry Marzinsky, and we've also got Sherry Swinney from the United States of America. And we've had Jerry on a few times before, and we're going to be talking about voices and demonic entities. And Jerry has got a unique insight into this area. But first, just wanted to talk to you about a few things. I'm doing shows on RBN, which is Republic Broadcasting Network, and that's out of Texas. And that's every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. UK time. And the shows are great. We get an American perspective. We bring the UK perspective to the States, and they bring their perspective to us. And it's very interesting, the difference in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The States seem to have a bit more of an idea of their rights. The thing is with this country is it's looking more and more like a communist Stasi by the day. Yes, these communitarian snitches are everywhere. Nearly 200,000 people shot their neighbors for going shopping more than they should, or basically not adhering to social distancing. This is incredible. And yeah, it's a compliance test. We've done so many shows on that. I'm not going to get into that tonight because we've got very important things to talk about. But yeah, do join me on Tuesdays and Thursdays on RBN, 8 p.m. It's a really good show, that. And it's Republic Broadcasting Network. You can find the link on windowsontheworld.net and the archives there too. Other good news just in is that the film that we're making, the Windows on the World production, The Heretics of London, Smithfield's Martyrs, the Martyrs of Smithfield in London, heretics who were burnt during the 15th century. The film's called The Heretics of London, is going very well. The trailer's going to be up soon. If you want to get a copy of the film, support us on Patreon. It helps us to keep going as well. I don't like using these globalist platforms. You can also help us out on PayPal. These are tough times for everybody, and it does help us to keep going. And thanks to everybody who is helping us to keep going. We're getting so much information in as well. Loads of people are sending really high quality information from all over the world. So that's great. And the listenership is very switched on. And that's fantastic because that's what we need in times like this. I'm going to bring on Jerry Marzinsky. We've got Sherry Swinney coming on the show a little bit later on. And we're going to be talking about demons, the presence of other worlds. I'm just going to bring Jerry on now. So yeah, here we go. Jerry.
Well, I think you've sufficiently scared them now.
I think they're getting used to it.
That's one of the last things.
I'm trying to slow things down a bit.
That's one of the last things the families want to hear, is that their loved ones are infested by demons. That's
well, it's better to know.
Well, yeah. Well, it's true. These entities are they're not good. So what
we've had many conversations about this, Jerry. I just want to introduce you first, though. Jerry is a retired licensed psychotherapist. He has over 35 years of experience working with schizophrenic and other psychiatric patients in state hospitals, state prisons, and emergency rooms. Jerry's formal academic training comprises a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, and 2 years of study in a PhD psychology program. Jerry's got a book out which he wrote with Sherry, and it's called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind.
We can throw that up.
Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. And there it is. I would highly recommend this book. And that's not a plug. We're not trying to sell anything. But if you want to know more, please buy the book. I've read it and I would recommend it. What I really like about the book is that it's laid out simply. It's not a dry academic read. It's actually prima facie evidence of studies that Jerry's done over 35 years, and there are solutions to this problem. This problem infects thousands and thousands of people. It destroys millions of lives all over the world because people do not understand what they're dealing with. And in my opinion, and also my experience, Jerry has absolutely nailed what this is about. So Jerry, yeah, great to have you on again. And I know a lot of people were looking forward to this. So do give a little bit of a background for the people who haven't seen you before, and then we'll move on and get Sherry into the stream.
Okay. Well, I spent 35 years working on the front lines of mental health, and started off with working in the biggest psychiatric hospital in the world for 7 years. I think when I got there were about 13,000 patients, down to about 23, down from 23,000. Spent about 18 years working in the psychology department of a state prison, studying the voices in schizophrenic prisoners. What I did was had them report to me in real time what the voices were telling them. So trying to figure out what these things were, how they operated, what they were saying, what they were doing, how they were reacting to things that I did, and trying to figure out ways to interfere with what they were doing. And there was some pretty interesting reactions to that. The last 10 years of my career, I spent working psychiatric crisis and hospital emergency rooms all over the city. I've worked in mental health centers, and saw a lot of contradictory behavior on the part of psychiatrists who pronounce these things, the voices, to be hallucinations. So it took me, well, more than a decade of denial before one day, and I spoke about this before one day the voices came through several of the prisoners I was working with, and were telling them that they were getting angry with me. So I'm getting reports from these prisoners that whatever I was doing to interfere with the voices was angering them. And that was, I had a close knit group of prisoners that I worked with constantly. The whole time I was working in the prison, and I worked with them more intensely than I did other prisoners. And the deal was that I would do everything I could to help them out and support them with whatever I could do for them. The trade-off was they needed to tell me in real time what their voices were telling them, so I could monitor what these things were saying. Now, that didn't sit well with psychiatry. Now, without having done a single study into the voices or what they are or what they were saying, they jump up and they go in their infinite arrogance and go, "We hereby dictate these voices are hallucinations," based on absolutely nothing. And when you start studying them, you see that they run very specific patterns. Now, families, one of the things we're doing today is we have a spring newsletter from the National Paranoia Network, which is a hearing voices support group there in England. And not quite sure exactly how to start here, but I guess with the families, because the families don't understand what's happening to their loved ones when they start hearing voices. It's very confusing. Their personality starts changing. They start withdrawing. They don't want to talk to their families. They start behaving very strangely. They act very agitated. They are not the same person that the family knew before all this started. Sometimes this comes on gradually. Sometimes it comes on suddenly. And Sherry, feel free to jump in anytime you have something to add here. And the families don't understand the strange behavior, and they don't know what to do. And they try to reason with their sibling, and that doesn't work real well because the voices aren't very reasonable. So they usually end up taking the family member to a psychiatrist, and what usually happens there is the psychiatrist brings them in and says, "Okay," diagnoses them with schizophrenia, and what we'll be talking about today is paranoid schizophrenia, which is one of the largest segments of psychosis, and the one that it is the one that affects most people. So they bring them into a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist listens. Oh, they're hearing voices right away. Okay. The voices are telling them bad stuff, and they're diagnosed paranoid schizophrenia. They're told their brain is broken due to a chemical imbalance in their brain, and that they must take these awful antipsychotic medications with horrible side effects for the rest of their lives, and that there's no other treatment. So when I started working at the state hospital, I noticed that even though the psychiatrists were saying that these things, the voices are caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, I never, ever saw them give a lab test or any kind of test to determine what chemicals were out of balance or by how much, ever. So
that's a really good point, Jerry, because I've read books on psychiatry, and this is a very important point, I think, to people who are looking into this, in that psychiatry makes statements. It doesn't give proof. Most of this stuff is just put into manuals and they repeat it, which is the problem with all academia, which is why we like to look into things from a different angle. And I think it's so important because we are in a psychological society, and psychology and psychiatry work hand in hand. And the crimes that are done in the name of psychiatry are absolutely appalling. And people are being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. They're having property taken off them. They are being abused within this system in this country. So that also is a thing that we'll be covering in the coming weeks. But yeah, I think that's such a good point, Jerry, that the voices and what they're saying, they are hallucinations. This has never been proven. And I hope we're going to win a few people over tonight who are skeptical. So carry on, Jerry.
Well, they haven't ever studied the voices. They just go, okay, we're not hearing them. Most people aren't hearing them, so they must be hallucinations. Now, if you take a closer look at them, what we're talking about is not word salad. They don't just come out there and just start spouting irrelevant words. These things talking complete sentences, and they carry on conversations with these with schizophrenics, and you could watch them in the state hospital. You could watch them walk around and carry on conversations with their voices. And again, Sherry, feel free to jump in at any time here. If you study the voices, you start looking at them, you'll start seeing patterns. Now, hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. They're positive, negative, they're neutral. They're just random. These things are not random. When you start looking at them closely, for the most part, they're negative. They say horrible, terrible things. They mock the patient. They tell them they're ugly, they're stupid, to kill themselves. They're virtually always negative. And there's no reasoning with them. You can't shut them up. If they try to ignore them, they get louder. So it has to be questioned what holds them on such a negative trajectory. Why aren't they random like all other hallucinations, like medical hallucinations or hallucinations when people take drugs? No, these things are unswervingly negative. Now, that's not the only pattern. They consistently upset the patient with what they're saying. And it seems like that's what they're trying to do. They're consistently anti-religious or anti-spiritual. Why would you expect a hallucination to be anti-religious or anti-spiritual? I've had more than one schizophrenic tell me that when they repeated the 23rd Psalm, the voices reacted as if they were thrown onto a hot frying pan. Why would a hallucination do that? And another thing that is critical is that after the voices attack, there is a marked drop in the energy level of these people, and that is consistent. They didn't use that energy, but they'll tell you, I can feel it leave, or these voices usually attack between 3 and 4 in the morning at night. Not exactly sure.
Jerry, I just want to bring something up there. Up because when I was talking to somebody who we've talked about, there was a crisis going on.
Mm-hmm.
It was between 3 and 4 in the morning, and it was very, very serious. And that's when I've managed to turn things around. We can get onto that bit later, but I think that's a really good point. It's in the sort of dead of night that this seems to happen more. It seems to be something that is consistent with my research as well. But I just wanted to bring that point in because I think it's a very good one. I'll just let you carry on.
Okay, good. And they also trigger nightmares too. That's part of the deal. So basically, I thought for years that this draining was due to the anxiety level of that these things cause. But then I'm not sure I need to go into the details, but I ran into a situation in the prison one day where a flaming, florid schizophrenic who was hallucinating constantly all the time, hearing voices, was in with somebody who had been locked up for snitching on a drug deal. And that man was sane. They were both locked in the same cell under the same conditions. So it was a perfect experimental situation. They were all, in the same environment, the same food, and the same situation, in the same exact cell. Everything was equalized. And I watched them as they came up the steps to the interview room on the cell block. And the one who was sane, but the gangsters were trying to kill him because he had snitched off their drug deal. And he was locked in with this guy, this psychotic guy who was staring at him at 3 a.m. He'd stand over his bed and just stare down at him. So that's pretty spooky. You couldn't be under more stress than that. And he had plenty of energy. He walked up the steps. His speech was coherent. It flowed. You watch him and his body showed plenty of energy. And then I pulled in the schizophrenic guy who was locked in with him. And this guy had no energy at all. He could barely make it up the steps. He sat in the interview chair like a dish rag. His words were slow. He was very depressed. They were eating the same food under the same circumstances. The guy hearing voices had no energy. So I went, okay, it's not due to the anxiety, because you couldn't be under too much more anxiety than the other fellow who was locked in the cell with this guy. So I took that and I'm like, okay, if it's not the anxiety, then what is it? Because there was a consistent pattern, and that's what we're looking here that psychiatry is totally ignoring, are these patterns, because they will not look into the voices. They're taught in their academic programming, and they are being programmed to believe that the voices are hallucinations, and that's all there is to it. And the schizophrenics have been trying to tell them for hundreds of years that these things are real. They're very real. And they just tune them out and say, oh, no, they're not real. They're hallucinations, and your brain is broken, and you need to take these drugs because of a chemical imbalance. There is no proof of a chemical imbalance. Matter of fact, they proved the opposite, that there is none. They have no idea what's in balance, out of balance, and they don't even have a test to measure it. But yet they continue with this, and this started with, I think it was Smith, Kline, and French, one of the drug companies who produced Prozac back in the 1970s. They knew they were telling a lie at the time. They were saying, oh, this antidepressant works because it fixes temporarily this chemical imbalance in the brain. And they put it out anyway. And if you look up antipsychotic drugs now, they'll say stuff like, oh, it is believed, or it is due to a chemical imbalance in the brain. They have no proof whatsoever. They have no evidence. All they have is a correlation. And
I think this is the whole thing about psychiatry, though, Jerry. It's all about misdiagnosis, because there is no diagnosis. And there's all of these terms that they put into the DSM manual. I think it's DSM manual, isn't it? And there's like oppositional defiance disorder and anything. You can be diagnosed with anything, and they'll generally just give you drugs for it. And that has been my experience of people who have been put on these psychotic drugs, and there's nothing wrong with these people. The diagnoses are to get them onto the drugs, and that is where it comes in. It's an industry, the industry of psychiatric drugs, and the detrimental effect that has on people is incredible. The side effects to these are so bad that they actually cause mental illness. And I've had some evidence of that this week. And there's a story we're going to cover just about that. But sorry, carry on, Jerry.
Well, you're exactly right on there. Every single one of those diagnoses that are in that DSM, what is it, 5 or 6 up at this point? I think they started off with like 131, and they were up over 300, more than double. They just kept generating. They make them up out of thin air. What they are is clusters of symptoms. So they go, these people are showing these symptoms, and they're not cut and dried. I mean, they bleed one into another. I mean, when we were taking abnormal psych, all of us in that class were going, well, I have that, I have that, I have that. We're like, holy cow. Everybody has some of these. And they go, okay, when they clump together like this, we're going to call it this. But it's a label that's made up, and there is no test for it. It's just a subjective evaluation that psychiatrists have taken upon their own to wield like a sledgehammer. And every single one of those diagnoses is made up. They used to have mental retardation used to be a mental illness. Homosexuality was considered a mental illness. I heard one time they had Southern Bell syndrome in there was a mental illness. Kids who give a bunch of bunk to their families are diagnosed oppositional defiant disorder. And they're putting increasingly large numbers of kids on these antipsychotic drugs. Now, these things are toxic. They rot out the individual's peripheral nervous system. And then when the body starts reacting with nervous shaking, like this, they then give them cogentin to suppress that so that they're not shaking. So they're able to rot out the patient's nervous system while they're in relative comfort. The damage goes on and on and on. And they had a name for this at the state hospital. It was called the Thorazine Shuffle, where these guys didn't have a normal gait. They just kind of dragged their feet, around behind them. These drugs are very toxic. Now, that's not to say they're not useful, but you have to couple them with a program like is mentioned in our book, or Sherry will talk about later how she came to develop what she calls the That's a Lie program. So one of the big things they're ignoring are the patterns that these voices run, because they're hallucinations, and no psychiatrist wants to study a hallucination because they're going to get bunked from their fellows. And you can't buck that system. It's so entrenched. And the drug companies are coming up behind them, making, what was it, $3.7 billion a year selling these antipsychotic drugs that cure absolutely nothing, but only temporarily suppress the voices and psychotic symptoms. Now that's good, because it allows you to reach that person, but you have to know what to do once you get there. And you can't just rely on these things, because once they stop taking these meds, all the symptoms come back. It's like they're being squashed down, and the price is damage to the nervous system, and I heard it also kills brain cells. So the psychiatrists make up these diagnoses, and what happened here?
You're still on, Jerry. It's fine.
Oh, am I?
No problem at all. Yeah.
Okay.
No problem at all.
Let me turn off my phone here.
Yeah. That was a good idea. Yeah, great comments tonight. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
I don't see
I'm going to have Sherry. Sherry's going to join us soon. Sorry. You're still on, Jerry.
Okay,
it's fine.
I don't see the video.
Yeah, all good.
Yeah. Do I need?
You're still on. Yeah, I think you're still on. No problem. Okay, great. Just carry on, Jerry. It's all going well.
Okay. Let me see where I left off here. Okay, so the going back to this this national paranoia network thing. They talk about
Can
now
I
this.
just introduce that, Jerry, so we know what it is? People out there might know what it is. National Paranoia Network is a group that's been set up, and they go out mentoring into London. I think they're setting up 22 groups in London through Mind, mental health charity. And they are made up of a group of people. Jerry's just been looking into it. They're called the National Paranoia Network.org. So you can look into them.
Okay. All right. Do I got a picture back yet or no?
You're there, Jerry. Just carry on. It's fine.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. So one of the, I'm getting a double thing. One of the first things I don't know if you can talk about here. They talk.
Yeah, we can see you, Jerry. It's fine. Just carry on. No problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
It says, except the voices are real. Okay. There are brain studies. I'm getting feedback here. Double feedback.
Okay, Jerry, it sounds great on this end. So,
okay.
As long as you can cope with it, that's fine. But I think we've had this trouble before, haven't we?
Yeah.
Remember
always have trouble on these
show we did with Tony.
Something doesn't want this out. Okay, so I'll try to deal with the feedback.
Yeah. Well, we sometimes have this trouble. Yeah. Okay. There's no feedback at this end anyway. It's all sounding good.
All right. So one of the first things they're saying is except the voices are real. Boy, this feedback it's crazy. I wonder, is there anything we can do about it? No.
I can hear you fine, Jerry. The stream's not great, but it's fine. I can hear you fine. No problem. Yeah, just carry on.
Okay. Okay, so it says one of them. Oh boy, it's driving me crazy.
Yeah, I think Jerry might have a bit of a problem with the stream, but apart from that, we're okay. Yeah.
I wonder if I have something. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay, the feedback is.
I think it's okay.
Okay, the double feedback is gone now. I clicked on something there and it went away. Okay, so it says except the voices are real. And then it says why? It says most importantly, because for the voice hearer, they are. The brain imaging studies show that the brain's primary auditory cortex responds in the same way to voices as it does to noises. We all can hear noises we all can hear. In other words, it is a real reception. Denying their reality or advising the voice hearer to ignore them promotes denial, whereas acceptance of their reality gives permission to start actively dealing with them. Now, this is very important because it flies in the face of what psychiatry is telling these people, that they are hallucinations, that they're not real. And if you stand up against that, as I have in the past, you're gonna be in trouble with these people. You know, they're not after the truth; they're after their dogma. They don't want to be challenged with regard to anything. Now, not only are they real to the patient, they are real. Period. I mean, Dr. Van Dusen, who wrote The Presence of Other Worlds, he worked in a state hospital in California, and I believe it was Mendocino. He was a clinical psychologist up there, and he would carry on long dialogues with the voices of his patients. And they would be both positive and negative voices, although the negative voices or the positive voices were very rare. And he was trying to befriend those voices to learn what he could about them. And one of the interesting things he did is he gave them, his patients and their voices independently, an MMPI and a Rorschach. And he told me that the results of that were that the voices were much more psychotic than the patient was, which was interesting. So these things are real. Sherry can tell you about that. I've spoken to them. They hated my guts. they were always telling the patients not to listen to me, to leave the office, to attack, not to show up for their appointments. And it was interesting having the patients report in real time what the voices were actually telling them. So I could see what I was doing, what kind of effect it had on them. And one of the things that I noticed was that virtually everything they were telling these guys were lies. They were malicious lies. And, you know, I think I've known Sherry for 25, 30 years. And we met one day where I developed a computerized substance abuse program for inmates. And I contacted her and said, hey, can I put this on your website? She had the biggest, what do you call it? Correctional reform website on the web in the US. She said, yeah, sure. And from that point on, we just kind of kept touch. And I couldn't, I saw the injustice in the prison system, and it just irked me no end. But I couldn't attack our system, the one I was in, because they crush you like a bug. But we could attack Alabama, and Alabama was much worse than our prison system. So I would help Sherry, tell her, what these guys are thinking, and how administration thinks, and how I thought they would react if she did certain things, and what not to do and what to do. And, I'd provide inside input to her. The whole time I was studying the schizophrenics and their voices. And one day I was talking to her on the phone, and this is after knowing her 10 years. And I was telling her about some strange things one of the patient's voices were doing, how they were liars, and some other stuff. And after 10 years of knowing her, and she's one of the most spiritually advanced people I know, she blurts out, oh, I know about that. I heard voices when I was a young woman. And I was like blown away. I mean, what? I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And this was after 10 years of knowing her. So you talk about, we'll talk later on about, these guys are advising, oh yeah, talk to people about your voices. You just can't do that. You have to talk to people who have experienced them or know about them, because the average person like Sherry, I mean, she knew what I was into, but she didn't bring this up for 10 whole years. And when she did, I couldn't believe it. So I started hitting her with all these questions that only somebody who would hear voices would know the answers to. And it was like, bam, 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 bam. And it was like, she hit them all. It was like she knew stuff that nobody else would know unless they heard voices. And from that point on, it's like we were like, okay, we need to get this out. We need to make people aware. And she had come up with a program based on the fact that the voices are consistent, consummate liars. They lie about everything just to upset the individual. And once they get them up to a furor, I mean, it doesn't matter. They will tell them anything that will upset them. And it doesn't matter whether it's a lie or not. And most of them are. So Sherry came up with this That's a Lie program. And it was much more formal and organized than what I had come up with. And she maintains that every negative thing that the voices tell these patients about themselves or others is a lie to upset them. And once the voices get them stirred up, then they drain that negative energy. And that's what they feed off of. Now, I wasn't aware of that until after this incident with the two prisoners in the jail, the prison's jail, where the one who was psychotic and the one who the drug guys were after trying to kill. And I brought a book in written by a shaman, Miguel Ruiz, and I was going to read it to one of the prisoners I was working with. And this guy earlier, probably a couple of weeks earlier, he was the one who turned around in the doorway as he was leaving my office one day, and he said, do you realize that what the voices, what you're doing with the voices is dangerous, don't you? And I hadn't thought about it. I figured, well, they're stuck in these guys' heads. They can't get me. They're stuck in there. They can't come out of there. I didn't think they could affect physical reality, so I wasn't really worried about it until it got my attention when he said, you know, what you're doing is dangerous. And he just looked at me and I'm like, huh, what? And then he turned around and walked out. And he come back later, and not only he, but several of the others began telling me that the voices were starting to get angry at me because I was telling the patients to do things that would interfere with what the voices were doing. And it was kind of blocking them out, and they weren't able to upset the patient to the degree that they had before. So here comes this flurry of reports. You know, the voices are getting mad at you, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. A hallucination is getting mad at me, and it was coming in from several different patients. Now, these symptoms I talked about earlier, along with the voices getting upset, it's not just with the patients here. They were at the state hospital. They were at the state prison, all these mental health centers, in the ER. The voices were consistent. It was like they were all made from the same cookie cutter. They were all doing the same things to these patients. So I noticed the energy drain, and I read that book by Miguel Ruiz. It started with the 4 agreements. It talked about the energy drain. And I brought that book in and read the paragraph where he was talking about the voices feeding off of the negative emotional energy they generated. And this patient went into a trance, and just this electrical crackle erupted in my office and just ran all up and down the walls. It went all the way up the wall at a 90-degree angle on the right side, across the office, and then back down on the other side. And I was in shock, and I was looking at this guy, and he was just looked like a zombie. He was just out of it, staring at me. He didn't say anything, and I said, "You hear that?" And he just said nothing. He just stared at me. And then he gets up after the voice, the crackling jumped into a Rubbermaid trash can by my left leg. I looked down in there. There wasn't nothing there. And it was just this crackling. And then it stopped. And he gets up and he goes, "I gotta leave." And he gets up and he shuffles down the hallway. And I'm kind of going, yeah, go. Get out of here. Go. And I was in shock. I was totally in shock. About 2 weeks before that, he comes to my office with knocks on the door without an appointment. And he said, "The voices want to talk to you." Now, this is the same guy with the crackling. And that had never happened before. The patient would always be the intermediary between voices and me. So the voices would say something and the patient would tell me what it was. And then I'd tell the patient, well, tell them this, or, so they were like the interpreter, the intermediary. And never had the voices spoken directly to me. And that was like after maybe 15 years of working with these things, maybe longer. So I let him come in the office, sit him down. I go, "What do they have to say?" And he looks at me and his voice changes just a little bit, gets a little deeper. And he goes, out of his mouth comes these words, "You have no right to interfere with our way of life," our plural. And right away he goes, "That wasn't me. That was the voices talking. That was them." Yeah. And I'm like, man, wow. That was where my denial system completely blew apart. I mean, after denying, it's a subconscious, it's maybe a chemical imbalance, maybe it's all these other things. At that point, I had no doubt whatsoever that these things were separate entities and different from the patient themselves. So they are real not only to the patient, they are real in reality. Now, we have Sherry and I have a Hearing Voices group ourselves, and I asked the group, I said, "What is it that you would want normal people to know the most. And this one responded and said, the most important point is that the voices are not hallucinations, but are in fact malevolent demonic entities that audibly terrorize people and feed off the extreme negativity they cause. Additionally, the rest of the public is also being affected by them, as they can influence us by inserting negative thoughts into our minds and pushing destructive desires, habits, addictions in an effort to destroy our lives. And then they can feed off of all the chaos they produce. They are parasites feeding off the strife they orchestrate from behind the scenes by negatively influencing humanity. Lastly, I've personally found success with a version of Sherry's That's a Lie program, whereby I stop the intrusive thoughts by strongly rejecting and renouncing them as they are happening, saying they are not my thoughts, that I would never think that way, and ordering them to stop. I hope this helps, and thanks again for all the years of research. So this is from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, it's really good stuff, Jerry, because this is where I think we got into a fascinating discussion the first time we ever talked. And I got in touch with you through a friend of mine, and we relayed these sort of experiences. And I've been looking into this for years. Obviously, you've had frontline kind of experience of it, but I've also had experience of it in respect of experiences that I've had where I've encountered these entities. And basically what we're talking about here, I think it's quite a simple thing in a way. I mean, these things are there draining your energy. Now, people drain each other's energy. We all know people who are energy drainers. Mm-hmm. We all know people who harvest your energy either consciously or subconsciously. Some people do it consciously. So a lot of this stuff is all about energy and the use of energy and the control of energy and the harvesting of energy. And what we're actually going through at the moment is a harvesting of energy. People are getting traumatized by this mind virus, and that's what it is. It's a mind virus.
Exactly right. And so is schizophrenia.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And when we had that conversation last week, I mean, very recently, this stuff has become even more real to me. And I can say for a fact that what you are saying here absolutely works, because last week it saved someone's life. This is an absolute fact. I'm going to bring Sherry in a minute because she's been waiting there a long time. But I just think that's a really good point now to bring in Sherry. And how did you and Sherry meet? Do you want to just go into that? I'll bring Sherry on now.
Hi.
Yeah, you want to? I think I brought up my version of how we met. You want to pick up from there?
Well, it's pretty much what you said, Jerry. We worked together with your rehabilitation program. It was to help prisoners get off of drugs and alcohol, and I posted that on my prison reform website. And the website was very, very popular around the world at that time. So, you know, we set it up so that people could download it and use it in their prisons. And Jerry was giving it away free. So that took a lot of effort. But in the meantime, we talked, and Jerry would often tell me about some of his experiences during the day. So yeah, when he told me that one story about this guy who did something and got in trouble and so on, I said, oh yeah, well, I know about those guys. You know, they're entities. I call them entities. And I don't call them demons because I don't really think of them as demons, although they are pretty nasty. And they might be demons, but, you know, I think of them more. Actually, it was many years later after I experienced these terrible thoughts. They were never audible voices for me. They were just really intrusive thoughts that came out of nowhere. And but after a while, many years after I started hearing those thoughts, I found out about the Nag Hammadi library, and I was so excited to hear that the Gnostics gave him a name. You know, because
yes.
Up until then,
Jerry, this is fantastic, because I had such a great experience reading those, and I've been quoting from them because a lot of that stuff is very relevant to what's happening now.
Yes.
And this idea of these archons, these leaders, and these entities. The thing about those scriptures, what if people out there don't know about them, Nag Hammadi scriptures were found in 1945 in Upper Nile in Egypt in a jar. This is the story. And there were 13 codices, bound codices, and they were in Greek, and they were gospels and kind of writings by this Gnostic group that lived in the sort of Qumran area, I think. And they were kind of into this Gnosticism, which had this idea that there was a pervasive evil that they were trying to keep out, and they were aware of it. They were aware of this negative intrusion. And there's some fantastic analogies in there. I won't go into them now because we haven't got time, but I often read them out on the shows. I read them out because these certain passages of the Nag Hammadi scriptures are fantastic. I think it's in the book of James where he says, fill yourself because they who are coming will come into you. In other words, if you're not consciously aware, these things can just jump in. And we see that often with drugs, through alcohol. There's a lot of evidence of this. There's a great book called The Infinite Boundary by D. Scott Roggo, who was a paranormal investigator. And there's much material on this I've studied over the years. So I just thought I'd come in there, Sherry, because it's an important point that people know what the Nag Hammadi are. But carry on, yeah.
And the voices would tell these guys where to get drugs. I mean, they would tell them, the prisoners would say, well, they told me where to get them. I'd show up at that time at that place, and somebody with drugs would come. So these things are real. Go ahead, Cher.
Well, I was going to say, when I learned that they actually had a name, I was actually pretty excited because I had no idea what they were. So that gave me some foundation to continue my studies. At the time, I hadn't figured out how to get rid of them yet. So, I was plowing through books about the brain, and, that wasn't really doing me a lot of good. And then I got into some self-help books, and, they were okay. They were great for self-help, but they weren't answering my questions. And finally, one day I was in the library, and this is how universe works with us. When you're diligent with something, universe will respond. I call it universe. Some people call it God. So I was in this library looking around to find another self-help book or something. And because I was really into finding out the answer to get rid of these things. And so I'm browsing around, and all of a sudden this book falls off the shelf and lands on my foot. And so I leaned down to pick up the book, and I looked at it, and I thumbed through it, and I thought, well, I'll just take it to the coffee shop and read it through before I decide whether I want to buy this one or not. And there was a passage in there that actually changed my whole life. It's a very simple passage, but it was something like, nobody can make you feel any way that you don't want to feel, and nobody can make you think what you don't want to think. And I closed the book. It was a book by Wayne Dyer, and it was called Your Erroneous Zones. And it's way back in the 70s, I think, or maybe the 80s. Anyway, so if anyone wants to read that book, it's probably in the archives somewhere. So, but this little passage actually made me realize, because of my background, I did not realize I actually had a choice in thinking. And so I just thought that whatever came into my mind, at first was my thoughts, until these really bad thoughts came popping into my head, and I didn't invite them in. They weren't my thoughts. They weren't anything I would think. So I just thought I'd try to get rid of them by brute force, or by, trying to reprogram my own brain. So that set me off on this other path of, okay, I have a choice of what I think. And so I'm going to think about what these things are, and I'm going to, reject them. And then as serendipity would have it, I was working at an engineering construction firm at the time. And my boss came and said, you know, we have a new contract and it requires a computer programmer to make the program work. Are you interested in learning how to program computers? I said, oh, sure. So I'm learning how to do that. And as I'm going through that process, I'm realizing, you know, the brain sort of works like a computer. So what if I could reprogram my brain? And so long story short, I figured out, well, I can't reprogram the code in my brain because that's way too complicated. Look, you know, there's millions of neurons in there. And so I decided, well, I'll have to think of something that is easy for me to remember while I'm being attacked by these terrible thoughts. And that's because that's what happens with people when they're being attacked. They're so overwhelmed by it that they can't remember anything long. You know, they have a hard time even remembering that's a lie. But that's a very short thing to say and bring up. So that's what I used, because I realized that what was coming into my head wasn't mine. It wasn't true. And so I just called it out. And sure enough, it made the voices stop, or the thoughts stop. They came back. And I had to be persistent, and it took me quite a while of being persistent every time they'd show up. But eventually, it became a natural thing for me, and I didn't have to remember anything. I just automatically knew. And then it was very easy to just say, okay, that's a lie. And now they're gone. And when they do come back, which, you know, they come back to everybody forever, they'll always try to test the waters. So you're never 100% clear of them, because these guys are opportunists. And we can see that from the current situation, that, you know, they're having a feast off all this fear.
Yeah, they are.
They're having a buffet. And I wish people would know that, you know, so, yeah, so I have a program that's written up on my website, and it's on Jerry's website too.
I think we got it in a book too, don't we?
No, we don't have the whole program in there. We just reference it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's on Jerry's page, and it's on my page for people to read. And we have a testimonial page where people can read what other people have said about it to know that it actually works. So it's a great little program. It's totally free. Anybody can use it. And, you know, we're happy to get feedback on anybody who does use it.
And the bottom line is it does work.
Huh?
Yeah. I'd just like to jump in here, Sherry, because yes, the basics of your program do work, because I tried them out the other week.
Oh, that's
and
great.
I was in a situation where somebody was actually going to kill themselves, and it took a long time. But it didn't take that long. Over about an hour, I brought them back. But what was interesting was that once they repeated that it was a lie, it wasn't them, a big change happened. And also, what was interesting was, because I'd obviously interviewed you and Jerry before, I've been working along these lines, actually even before I spoke to you. So when I did speak to you, it was a kind of a relief, really, and a kind of a revelation. But I said that what's going to happen is they're going to say, don't believe him. They're going to say, you can't trust me.
Absolutely.
They're going to put doubts into your mind, and they're going to say, I'm talking rubbish, and I'm trying to make a fool of you. They're going to say all sorts of things. Don't believe it. Just keep telling them that it's a lie, and it's not you. What's happening to you is not you. Mm-hmm. And it was absolutely amazing. This is something I've been waiting for, or trying to prepare this person for a long time, because the input wasn't there before. It wasn't actually possible to do it. A situation had to arise where there was a life and death situation, and it was a sort of defining moment. So, yeah, I'd like you to carry on, Sherry. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that, Mark, that worked so well, because that's the reports that we're getting from other people. You know, they're saying, oh, my Lord, this is just wonderful. It works so fast. And, you know, but of course, the voices do come back. But, you know, it's easy for them to repeat it. over and over and over again until they end up realizing that there's no food here.
Well, they can't hook you. I mean, they're like fishermen they throw this at you. Are you going to bite on this? They have access to your entire memory. They can dig up every rotten thing that's ever happened to you or that you've ever done. And they go in there and they can blend with your memory, pull that stuff up and rub it in your face. And then they tell you lies about stuff. Oh, it was your fault. You caused this thing. It was totally your fault. And every other lie they can think of. But if you realize that you're being lied to, they can't hook you. You have to believe what they're saying in order.
Excuse me, Jerry, talking about them getting into your memory and bringing up every bad and rotten thing that you ever did. They can also bring up something good that you did and twist it to make it sound like it was bad. It's amazing how they can do that. And
Sherry, I'd just like to come in here because this was a consistent problem with my friend.
Mm-hmm.
That there would be a situation that would just get portrayed completely wrongly, and the reaction would be so violent. And I thought it was something to do with a mental illness, but no, it wasn't. It's all been this same kind of situation all the way along. It has been these negative voices. And that's been the entire problem from the beginning. I thought it was the problem. I was convinced it was, but I was trying to look at it over kind of long term and look at all these different situations. But the degradation that these voices put you through and what I've seen them do to this person is really horrendous. And you feel like a duty of care. But then what happens is they start attacking you.
Yes.
And that's the point where me and Jerry got to a couple of years ago. I was sat there for hours talking about this stuff because I'd just come out of this situation where I'd had to get rid of this thing that had attacked me.
Mm-hmm.
And that is another, because I'd had experiences of these entities trying to jump in before through other people. And basically, the whole study of it is something that fascinated me a lot. But yeah, just carry on with what you're saying. Don't want to jump in too much because this is fascinating.
Yeah, they would attack me too. And toward the end of my career, maybe the last 8 years, I could actually feel them when they were present. And it was like this ooky electrical energy. I mean, there's no other feel like it. And I could tell how strong they were, how angry they were with what I was doing by the intensity of that electrical icky feeling. And there were times where it was so strong, I felt like I had some kind of barrier, like on Star Trek, where they had pushed that so far in that I thought they were going to enter me. And I always wondered what would happen if they did. And it was, they don't like you interfering in their business. They want that negative emotional energy. They don't want you trying to help the person. That's why they go after families. They don't want the family to give them any aid that'll interfere with their feeding. They'd rather the family disappear and go, this guy's gone. He's a pain in the butt. Send him to the hospital, get him away from the family because they work to tear up families. So they're parasites and they're very real. So any attempt to get rid of them causes them to act up. You know, they know when somebody's telling them stuff that is dangerous to them, or when somebody's doing something that's dangerous to their feeding. So I think we mentioned about they're being able to pick these up electronically through an EEG. When the patient hears the voices in their temporal cortex, there's electrical signals. So not only is the brain picking up the electrical signal when there is no auditory noise coming in from outside. I mean, they put headphones or something on them so they were in silence, and then they would push a button when they were hearing the voices to let the researchers know when they were hearing the voices, and that button push corresponded to this EEG electrical signal happening on one of their monitors. So they were actually seeing it electronically. So these aren't just real for the patients; they're real, period. And the second point that this Hearing Voices group was making was focus on helping the person to try to reduce distress rather than get rid of the voices. Well, if they don't know how to get rid of them, that would be probably okay. But if they try to get rid of them and they don't know how, the voices are going to get more agitated, which is probably why they wrote this.
I'm thinking that that what they have in mind is if they don't distress over the situation, maybe they won't be giving out negative energy. So maybe that's where they were coming from with it.
Yeah, they're trying to reduce the distress.
But they're not helpful guides like this says here.
Oh, no.
Even when they are helpful, the end is destructive.
So here where they say that the distress is the real issue, not the voices. No. Yeah, I disagree with that we both disagree with that. The real problem is the voices, but they don't know how to get rid of them. They don't know that they are indeed real. They don't know that they are energy vampires. And says, in fact, many people hear voices lead fully functioning and successful lives. Now, that's one of the things I saw when I was working in the psych rehabilitation center at the state hospital. These things would sabotage. We had a vocational school there under the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, and we were training these schizophrenics for jobs. Now, as they approached graduation, virtually all of them would do something to sabotage themselves. Time after time after time, they everything they were almost succeeded at, the voices would come in and sabotage them. They'd have a breakdown, or the voices would get real loud. It was constant sabotage. These things do not want people that they infest to succeed at anything. They want them to be as miserable as possible. They don't want them to have any success. They don't want them to have a family. They're interfering with their consciousness. They're interfering with their free will. They're interfering with their ability to concentrate. A lot of these guys are hearing two conversations at once. So they're trying to talk to somebody, and the voices are talking on top of that. So they get confused about what's happening, and people don't understand what's going on there. Says many people hear and focus on their positive voices. The positive voices are very, very, from my experience, very rare. And although I've
voices anyway, they're usually not voices; they're thoughts.
Well, feeling or intuition is what they mostly are. Now, I've noticed they come when the person is right on the verge of death. They have a gun to their head, or they're about to kill themselves, and a positive voice may jump in at that time and interfere, or do something miraculous to interfere. So where there's these things, there are also guardian angels and positive spirits. And I've seen that in a number of cases where one guy had a .357 Magnum loaded, all the cylinders were loaded. He put the gun to his head, and he go click, pointed it at the floor and went bang, put it at his head again, click, put it at the floor again, bang. He goes, okay, I got it. Thing after thing after thing like that, where they would actually interfere in some miraculous way with the suicide attempt. Another one was a guy went out deep into the woods, and he hung a noose around a tree, and he was hanging from it when a hunter just appeared out of nowhere out in the woods and cut him down. Another one, he turned on the gas in his apartment. His sister visited him twice a year. While he was starting to pass out due to the gas, she shows up at his door. Another one had a .45 pistol. He put it to his head, pulled the trigger, it went click. Next day at the gun range, he took it out, he put that same round in there, and it went off. There were hundreds of stories like that. And, they were so common. They were like in the old days when lobsters were overrunning Maine. I didn't pay any attention to them. I should have written more down. But yeah, there are also positive forces available too, but very seldom do they speak in words.
Jerry, I'd like to interrupt for a minute
Okay.
and go back just a bit when you were talking about your patients sabotaging themselves.
Mhm.
This happens in the outside world too, with the thoughts that are coming in, where a person, it happened to me many times, where, and I have some friends that it happened to, so I watched this kind of everywhere. People will get into a project. They're trying to do something to improve themselves, or they're trying to learn something new, to do something different in life, and they'll get distracted. They'll get sidelined. They'll skip a day. They'll get involved in something else. Something else will draw them away from going to doing their practice, even if it's just things like meditation. If you think, okay, I'm going to start meditating because I know it's really good for my health. I know it's good for my peace of mind. And so you'll start meditating and you get with it and you're doing it real, for 2 or 3 days in a row, and you're thinking, okay, I'm in a groove. And then all of a sudden something happens and you're too busy. And pretty soon some time goes by and you've lost everything that you learned. And this happens with not just meditation, but with any kind of project. So people who are being plagued by these entities will encounter that sort of problem. So if anybody's listening and they're encountering that problem, just realize what that is. And if you're serious about learning what you want to learn or doing your project, just say, that's a lie.
Well, Sherry and I both had this experience with being distracted. Now, one thing that's interesting is I thought these voices for years sounded like something else, like somebody else's voice, like Mark or Sherry. You can tell that they're different voices, but there was one day I was curious. I got home from the state hospital and I was praying to hear them so I could hear what they were like, and I got my prayer. And what shocked me was they sounded just like all the other thousands of thoughts that go through my head in a day. There wasn't any difference in the timbre or the tone, or they sounded just like my normal thoughts, other than their intent was totally different from anything that I could conceive of. I mean, they were telling me I was going to drown and to panic, and the situation I was in. They picked the wrong person because I was very well trained, and I was swimming in the middle of a lake, and they were telling me I was going to drown, and I just kept defying them until I ended up at the bottom of the lake at around midnight, and it was at that time where there was like about 20 seconds.
Yeah, we just lost Jerry there. We'll get him back again.
He's getting into the good part, so that
Yes.
happens.
We had so much trouble before. Yeah, we had so much trouble before with this, Sherry, that he has disappeared. Actually, I hope he gets back in.
I'm sure he will.
We might have to get him on again.
Yeah.
But yes, we have had this trouble before. I think the first show we ever did, it was about 2 years ago. And there was 3 of us, and the producer to the show, Tony, he phoned me up. He said, "Oh, I feel terrible. I can't get my head together. I'm all over the place. I feel really strange." I said, "So do I. I feel like something's hit me. I felt like something's knocking me out, and I can hardly think straight." And then Jerry come on. He goes, "Oh, I'm really wiped out. This is doing my head in already." It was a struggle to get through it, but I think this stuff is very fascinating because I've been thinking along these lines for so long, and I'm just reiterating that really because Jerry's obviously he's back again. That's great, but
I don't see him.
Yeah, he's here. He's backstage. It's okay. I can bring him back again. So, Jerry, welcome back. Yeah.
Something like this always happens. I mean,
you were right in the middle of your Bottom of the Lake story.
We were talking about it. Yeah. So okay, carry on, you two. That's great. I'll remove myself.
Okay. So what I did was defied these things. So I was swimming out into the lake, and it was like 10 at night, and I got into a rhythm, and it was like a meditation, and I adjusted for my air intake and how much energy I was putting out. So I was like cutting through the water, and it was like a meditation. And then I started getting tired, and I stopped, and I was in the middle of the lake, and I was pretty far from shore. And all of a sudden, this I look, and I could see the lights on the shore, and here comes this thought. I could see for myself I was far. I was too tired to make it back in the way I was. I had to stop. But I'd been scuba diving. I went through a whole year of skin and scuba diving training at Temple University before that's what they required back in those days. Here's this. I call it a voice, but it sounded just like me. But it was saying, "Well, you're too tired to make it back to the shore." I'm like, "Yeah," and I thought this was my thought. And then it says, "It's getting late." Yeah, okay, I see it's getting late. Fine. And the lights are going out on the shore, and much later you're not going to be able to see the shore because there's no lights from the cabins there. Okay, well, fine, no big deal. And then it goes, "And you're going to drown." And I'm like, "What? I'm going to what?" It's like that was the last thing on my mind. The very last, I wasn't concerned about that at all. And so what they taught us in scuba class is you go into this dead man's float. So you put your hands behind your back and you arch over, and you put your face in the water, and you're actually floating like a dead guy. And then when you run out of breath, you whip your head up, you blow the air out real quick because you start sinking immediately, and then you take another one as you go underwater. So and then you sink down maybe 2-3 feet below the surface, and then you bob back up and you float on the surface again. And you just hold your breath until you need another one, and you're expending hardly any energy. And as I'm sinking, it goes, "Well, see, you're heading toward the bottom. You're going to drown." And I'm like, "What?" Yeah. So come back up. And the next time I went, "Well, okay, I'll show you. I'm going to defy it." So as I was sinking, I let the air out. I was sinking. I let some more air out. So I would sunk further and faster. And you hit a place called, they call it the crush depth, where your lungs are crushed in so hard, so tightly that you're no longer buoyant. And all of a sudden you just kind of go from a slow sink to like a boom like that. And I hit that. And because this thing was there, I mean, this was really odd, even to me, even at the time. As soon as I started that, I knew what was happening, but I shot back up to the surface and hit the surface. And here it was again. "See, you're panicking. You were heading for the bottom. You're going to drown. You're panicking." And I'm like, "What the hell is this?" And I went, "Okay." So got another breath and then sunk back down again. And I kept sinking and sinking and sinking until I hit what they call a thermocline. So here's this cold water coming. I could just feel this cold feeling coming up my legs, moving up my body. And I shot to the surface again. And even before I got there, I knew it was the thermocline. It's usually a layer of cold water that sinks down to the bottom because it's heavier than the warmer water, and it just stays there. I'd hit it a million times scuba diving. Hit the surface, and here it was again. "See, you're panicking. You're going to drown. Look, you're too far out. The lights are going out. You're tired, and there's a motorboat coming, and it can't see you, and it's going to cut you to pieces." And I didn't hear a motorboat while I was down there. Usually, maybe I was concentrating too much on whatever, waiting for something to grab me or something. And I look, and here's this motorboat coming in the distance with the green, red navigation lights on. And it says, "They can't see you. They're going to hit you, and they're going to cut you to ribbons." And I wasn't worried about that either, because there were times where I had to dive below motorboats while I was scuba diving. And I went, "Well, if I need to, I'll head for the bottom, and I'll stay there till it passes over." I wasn't worried about it. And I'm tracking it, and it's coming closer and closer and closer. And I watch it, and it passes maybe 50 feet away. And I'm watching it as it disappears into the distance. and I'm not paying attention, and the wake hits me in the face just as I'm taking in a breath of air. I wasn't thinking. I was like, oh, and I swallow this mouthful of air, and I start coughing and trying to spit it out, and here it comes again. So you're drowning, you're going to panic, you're on your way down, and it's trying to get me to panic, and I'm like, screw this thing, what the hell is this? So I caught my breath, sunk back down again, let the air out, and sunk all the way down, past the thermocline. And what was strange is this thermocline didn't lay on the bottom. So I went through it. It was a layer of cold water, and then sunk down. And then I felt this icky, strange stuff coming up my leg. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And I shot back up to the surface. And before I got up to the surface again, I realized it must be the bottom. I thought the whole bottom of the lake was rock because, as far as I'd been out from the shore, it was all rock. And I wasn't expecting muck, and this was muck. And here it comes again. As soon as I hit the surface, see, you're panicking. The lights are going out. You're going to drown. You're not going to make it back. And I went, screw you. What the hell? So I went back down again. My feet stuck in the bottom of the mud, and I'm floating above the bottom with my knuckles like maybe 6 inches above the bottom, and kind of halfway expecting something to grab me. So I was kind of afraid at the same time. I mean, it's weird to be at the bottom of a lake at around midnight, and there was this complete silence. I mean, the water was bath warm. There was no sound. There was no feeling. All my senses were shut down in this. I couldn't even feel the muck because it just was so soft. It was like ooze. And the only thing that was there was an awareness that I was aware. So I was aware that I was aware. And that's what's past all this input that's coming in. That's who you are. You are that consciousness. Now, society has taught you that you are your thoughts, and most people believe they are their thoughts. But if you can step back, you can watch those thoughts. If you step back, you can listen to those thoughts. You are not those thoughts. You are the one who's thinking or listening to those thoughts.
That's brilliant, Jerry. That is such a good, important point. And it's a point I think we made last time, but I think it's an important one, that we are just this field of consciousness. And consciousness is a very abused term, in my opinion, now, because I think it's misunderstood. But that open awareness, just an awareness without content, is what's behind everything. And that is a very revealing thing, which can expand your knowledge in these areas a lot, because you get to know what an energy field is, and you get to know what an interruption of an energy field is. And I did some training on this years ago with some people called the International Academy of Consciousness. I didn't agree with everything they were doing, but they did a lot of these exercises where you became aware of your energy, and they would try and attack your energy field, and you had to defend yourself. It was a very interesting experience, and proves that negative intent does actually exist, and it is tangible. So yeah, I think that's an important point I just wanted to make there. I'm enjoying just sitting back and listening, actually, Jerry, because I do 4 shows a week now, so it's great to have a bit of a break. So you and Sherry carry.
Well, I have some input there too. I learned some of that when I was studying martial arts years ago. I learned about the chi, that is the energy that surrounds you. And I watched this Zen master. Actually, he'd been practicing for 40 years or so. He was really an old guy, but he was amazing in that he had his students, and these were college students, so they were football size, gusto people, and he had them attack him, and he actually threw them across the lawn without touching them, and he did it with his chi. So the energy that we have around us is very, very powerful. You can build on it, you can work on it, but the main point is to realize that it's there, and everything in this universe is based on frequency. And that's what these entities, they know that, and they know how to manipulate it. They know how to manipulate our thoughts and thus our feelings. And so, and they do this with everybody. Every single person at some point in their life has some sudden thought that pops in or some sudden feeling that pops in, and they don't really know where it came from. So we have to be aware that those things happen, that these entities they're on Earth, or they're from Earth, or they're part of Earth. I don't know where they came from, but I think that that's what's driving this whole CV situation that we're all experiencing today. I think that, you know, they're driving the fear factor in every single person who is afraid.
I can tell you that you turn on that mainstream TV news and those guys sound just like the psychotic voices attacking a patient. They sound just like them. You know, you turn it from station to station, they're all saying the same negative, fearful, awful, everybody's going to die. There is no, I mean, that's them. That's them right there. That's them. That's what.
I think this is a great point, Jerry. This is what I've been talking about a lot over the past 6 weeks. This system that we're in, this communitarian system, is anti-truth. Anything that's anti-truth is basically a gateway for negativity and these negative forces, because what you get now is people who actually, they lie to get a point over. We're in a post-truth world, so people will actually say, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way about it. Well, no, this is a fact that I've just actually proved. No, it's the way you feel that way. I may choose to see things differently. Well, actually, this is a fact. No, I may choose to see that differently. And that's communitarianism. That's the society we're in. And that's why public officials lie all the time. And this is a manifestation of it. Yeah, that's my input there. Anyway, I'm going to jump out again.
Well, yeah, the mainstream media, I mean, they're just, you look at the lies they're telling, and they're being caught time after time after time, and they don't retract those lies. You know, there is one hell of a battle going on right now between good and evil. It's you know, you guys over there with Brexit, they've done everything they possibly could to stop you, to keep you under their control, to keep you under their thumb. Trump is being attacked from every which way, but every hit with everything but the kitchen sink and more. I mean, it's just constant lies.
This is very, very deep, because there's an overall, the way I see it anyway, there's an overall plan to destroy our consciousness. So this is like a war on consciousness, in my opinion. That
yes, to make people subservient. Basically, what I've noticed during this thing, Sherry, is that UK is become communist. It was already communist, and now this has proved it, because they are so compliant in this country. They seem to have their spirit drained out of them. And if you start talking and throwing in a few facts, it's like so much of a shock to the system that people are literally shutting down. So this is a big problem. And that is, a point that we've been making in the shows over the last couple of weeks, really. And I think it all ties together. All this is a bigger picture. Yes. All of it is, because we're talking about energy and consciousness. Now, I don't want to sound new age here, because these words have been absolutely kind of abused in my view.
And that's, I think these words that are real, that are very meaningful, and they'll trivialize them to make it sound all new age stuff.
And one of the big ones was
right.
the phrase invented by the CIA after the World Trade Towers were brought down. Anybody who countered the CIA's and the government's point of view on that, even though there's all kinds of evidence that these towers were brought down, were called conspiracy theorists. That's the CIA came up with that. And now it's being used against everybody that speaks against the government. You're a conspiracy theorist, as if that proves anything.
Well, what it does is they started it out for the Kennedy, to shut people up that were questioning the Kennedy assassination. They had to come up with a way. And so they said, well, and there's a document that says, we'll call them conspiracy theorists, and that'll give them, some sort of a bad name. And it will just, make it sound like they're now in the 9/11 part, you were a terrorist.
Well, it's called mimetic warfare. Mimetic warfare. So basically what it is, you get this coming out of the intelligence services, and they'll say things like, I suppose you voted Brexit. I suppose you voted Trump. And I suppose you think that Elvis lives on the dark side of the moon. So the third one's this kind of connection to a false argument. So the false argument and the ad hominem attack is literally a product of the deep state. That's where it comes from. So
Yes.
when you hear that, you know that where they've learned it from. So the people who go, oh, is that a tinfoil hat conspiracy theory? They are repeating that on behalf of the people who told them to say it. It's circular.
Sure, because we're witnessing people not thinking on their own. And that's pretty dangerous.
Well, that's what the mainstream media has been doing for decades, is brainwashing people. And now people are starting to wake up, and they don't like it.
Yeah, and
That's
you know,
right.
for someone who's been asleep all these years through everything up until now, and then there's for those that are waking up, it's a major shock to their system. So, you know, they're going to want to go into denial because it's so much more comfortable there. I have a girlfriend who told me one time, you know, it's just so much more comfortable to be oblivious. And I said, really? You know, I mean, how about getting your power back by knowing the truth? And she said, oh, yeah, you're right. I just don't like thinking about it. Well, I understand that, but that's probably, and I'm thinking that's probably how an awful lot of people are feeling right now. They don't want to think about it because it's just such a terrible thing to think about. That our country...
Well, I think you see, the thing is, I think this is about truth. You see, if you face truth, I mean, what's happened in the last 4 or 5 weeks, especially after that experience I had with this friend who'd been going through this terrible time, is that a few days before that happened, I've got this fortification of kind of energy now. I feel more focused than ever because I knew they were going to pull a stunt like this. And yes, it is a stunt. And it's brought in so many things on the back of it that is frightening. But I'm actually more sort of not angry, but I'm determined that they're not going to take my freedom away. I want to travel. I've got things to do. We're doing a good job here. These morons who are coming in, these basically the agents of the state who are doing it, who are facilitating it, this a part of it, because in other words, you've got like people who are like ghosts. Ghosts just hang around and they're pretty harmless, but they can throw their toys out of the pram now and again and be poltergeists, especially child ghosts, right? Well, it's all comparable to what's going on. Then you've got the next level, which is people who are possessed, and then you've got the next level to that, which are full-on demonic entities. But the point is, in the society we're in, those 3 roles are already taken. Those roles are actually being played out now within this situation. So, in other words, you can actually make this an analogy. You can make what we're talking about an analogy to actually what's going on. Somebody put in the chat, Jerry, they put a comment about voodoo. And now this is quite an interesting thing because it's about malevolent intent. And we did touch on that a little bit earlier, but the malevolent intent, which is focused through an object. What do you think of that?
I think there's something to it, you know, because I've seen accounts of, you know, voodoo people actually killing people, you know. I ran into somebody like that in the prison once who said he could cast spells and kill people. There was one time where I was talking to a Navajo Indian fella, and he was telling me of a visit he had with his grandmother. So he lived in northern Arizona, and his father said, well, I'm going to take you over to your grandmother in New Mexico so she can teach you some of the Indian ways. And this guy, he's a real mellow guy. The Navajos are pretty mellow from what I've seen compared to the Apaches. So I got to talking to him, and he said, well, what happened? You know, I'd go with my grandmother. I'd help her out around the Hogan. It was, you know, like a round building that they build. It's small, dirt floor. And he said she had this big jar of money with all these, you know, $100 bills in there that didn't seem to mean anything to her. And she would help him. He would help her around the Hogan and you know, collecting food and stuff. And then one day, after maybe a month or two, she says, well, we're going to have visitors tonight. I want you to clean up the Hogan some. And oh man, here we go again. All right. So he's helping, and what they had was a 50-gallon heater in there in the drum. It was a 50-gallon drum that they would put wood in and burn. And so he helped out, and then he kind of laid in the bed behind the 50-gallon heater drum. And these guys came in at around 10 at night. He said there were two appeared to be teenage people. One was a male, one was a female. They were completely naked, and they were painted totally white. And before they came, the shaman came, and he was beating on his drum. It was just him, his grandmother, and the shaman. And the shaman was beating on the drum. And it would get more and more intense and more and more intense. And then it got very intense. And then these two naked individuals showed up, and they sat down with him, and he started beating the drum again. And then at some point, it got so intense that those two people, the two white painted naked ones, just passed out. They just dropped to the ground from a sitting position. And the doorway, which was like a fabric woven doorway, blew open and wide open, and then shut again. And he was waiting for whatever happened. And when he woke up, he fell asleep. When he woke up, they were gone. And he asked his grandmother what they were doing, and she said they were going to get a specific bone from somebody who was buried somewhere. So he remembered that, and when he got back to Arizona, he told his father this, and his father went crazy. He drove over to New Mexico, and he just, I don't want my son exposed to this. I don't want you showing him anything about this. Don't want him to be doing anything with this, and just, tore her up. And he asked about the bone, and it was, like you were saying, it's some kind of voodoo thing where they would stick this into somebody or send it spiritually into somebody, and they could kill them that way. So
yeah, it's this intent. I mean, the other thing is that a lot of this black magic works when the victim actually knows that there is a curse. In other words, the curse is revealed to them, but sometimes it's not revealed to them, which is interesting. Side issue. But also the voodoo thing is all about objects and the imbibing of something into an object, a focusing of that object. And this is an interesting thing, because there is something called psychometry, where people can pick something up and go, that's the history of it, and I know the person who's owned it. So these things kind of get imbibed into an object. But what's interesting, I'll tell a little anecdote here to give you a rest, Jerry. Many years ago, it must have been about more than 40 years ago, my father bought this octagonal sewing box. It was a Victorian sewing box at an auction. And my mother said, "Oh, I really don't like that. Get that out of the house. I don't want that in the house." And he goes, "Oh, it's very well made. We can always sell it again." And it went into the front room. Now, what happened overnight was the front room got absolutely soaked with water, and it was totally unexplainable. It was completely soaked, and there was no way it could have got in. Then, I mean, I was very young at the time. I was probably about 3 or 4 years old, and my brother was in a pram, and we had all this guttering around the house, and there was a roar, and it was like everything went still, and there was this roar, and my brother was in a pushchair, and I was just by the side of it, and we looked up, and it just gone silent. It was a moment of this weird silence, and then there was this roar above us, and we looked up, and all of this iron guttering just crashed down where we were standing, and my mother pushed my brother in and grabbed me, and we got in the house. And what was very interesting about it was that when it went back to the auction, it got sold for the same price, but there was definitely something about that object that brought this on. And that is a very fascinating thing too. And I don't think it's that common, but I've had this several times before. So in other words, this idea of an intent going into an object it would have to be very powerful. it would have had to be something very powerful, because obviously most objects don't carry that, or they'd only carry it in a very sort of small, unobtrusive kind of way. But when I did this sort of investigation into this stuff, and the especially into parapsychology, this stuff is quite important and it's quite well known. In fact, the Russians did a lot of experimentation into this, more in Russia than here, actually. The Russians were into this during the Cold War, very much so. I've got a book called The Soviet Psychic Discoveries Next Door, which I think came out in the 80s. And there was a lot of people going from east to west, basically, and west to east, experimenting on this. People were going, through Pravda to meet these people in Russia to do these experiments on parapsychology, but also on this sort of psychometry stuff and auras, all sorts of things, really, because parapsychology is a big field and it is the study of energy. That's all it is, really. It's the study of energy. And this kind of negative energy, I think that the idea of curses is very, very real, especially when you've got these tribes where there's been a lot of killings. And I think these curses need to have to sort of be recognized and confronted, because I've said this to several people. I said, look, you might need to apologize, just apologize. And I think this will end, and there's so much in this stuff. But I think it goes down to actually being aware of it and not putting not putting too much of your own thoughts into things and beliefs. Mm-hmm. You have to approach this in a very open way to get to what it's about, because we're talking about something that a lot of people make extremely subjective. Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing with the voices. They are negative energy fields. And they have to realize, and I think I've said this, is a number of patients I worked with would ask the voices, "Who are you?" And they would say, "We are you." They want them to believe that they are the negative entity, that they are the one. So that's the problem with believing that you are your thoughts. If they can get the patient to believe that those thoughts that they're putting in the patient's head belong to them, then there's nothing they can do, because the patient perceives that as that's who they are, that they're their thoughts. And then you have to break that off. You have to break those voices away and get them to realize that they're not their thoughts and that they are not those voices. Psychiatry doesn't even look at that. They go, "Oh yeah, they're your thoughts, and they're what do they call them? You've got a thought disorder." But do you think they've spent any time studying that thought disorder? No.
Well, there are studies about thoughts being multidimensional. And there's a lady named Lynn McTaggart who has this intention experiment, where she gets people around the world to have an intent on something, and then they look to see what happens. And these people, they're ordinary people without a lot of training. Some have no training, but they just do the intention. And they do it according to the way that she teaches, and they actually they've been able to change matter. Now, the noetic sciences has done this too, where they've actually changed matter through intention. So we know that that's real. And I've even seen some news clips about this demonic group. I don't remember the name of it, but this is during the time that they were trying to get Trump impeached, and they would actually have ceremonies, dark ceremonies, to throw a curse on him. So
I've heard of that.
Yeah. So that's a real thing.
Yeah. So I think we drifted off a little bit from talking about the voices on the spring edition of the thing here.
Well, true enough.
That's fine, Jerry, because this is a kind of relaxed thing. We've got people in the chat box. It's not a structured sort of show. I mean, I think it's good to have these sort of discourses, really. That was the idea of it, so that we could go on for maybe a couple of hours and sort of exchange views, and people are putting things in chat. It's a sort of relaxed thing on a Wednesday night, so I don't think that's a bad thing. But yeah, if you want to get back to that, I've actually got it up on the screen here. It says it can help to think of the voices as just other people in your loved one's life. Well, that to me is absolute insanity. If I'd have thought that, Jerry, if I'd have thought that, I mean, I nearly died during all this stuff. We talked about it a couple of years ago. I have been the closest to death I've ever been in this situation with this person I was helping. And if I'd have said that, oh, yes, they're just other people in your life. They're all right. We can get on with them. Well, no, we can't, actually.
That's exactly right.
It's like one of us has to leave, you know.
That took me back, too. When I saw that, I went, holy cow, what are these people doing? I think we all agree on that one. That one's crazy. The other thing, backing up some, it said set strong boundaries with them. Sherry, what do you think about that one? I don't think it's doable. You either got them or you don't.
Yeah, you can't. They don't do boundaries.
No, they don't respect anybody's boundaries. They don't respect anybody or anything.
No, the people that wrote this are. I don't know if they're misinformed or they haven't had experience or, or what. I know they're really trying to help, but
I think so too. But they don't understand. And I think part of that is where they say, oh, talk to people about your voices. I mean, there is no positive benefit to talking to people about the voices who don't hear them or have heard them or understand.
This goes on to say, set strong boundaries with them or find new ways to interpret and make sense of what the voices say. Well, yeah, we can make sense of what the voices say, even though, what they're saying is contrary to what we're thinking or
lies and outright lies. You can make sense of the lies.
Yeah. Well, you can justify anything,
especially if you believe them. So I would say don't try to make sense of them. These things are malevolent. They're after your energy. They could care less about you. They treat you like we treat cattle. They stir you up. They turn your emotional state negative because they only can draw your energy once your mental state is negative. They can't take it from a positive mental state. That's like toxic to them. Yeah. So once they get you whipped up, they drain you and then put you out to pasture for a while until you make more energy. And then they come turn it negative and they take it again. They could care less about you. All they want is that food.
Well, Van Dusen he didn't try to set boundaries, but he watched his patients try to set boundaries and it didn't work.
No, I can't imagine it working.
No, I can't either because these guys barge in uninvited.
Right.
It's like the positive forces require permission. They don't barge in unannounced without it being invited, unless it's a life or death situation, maybe.
Right.
But for the most part, they have to be invited, which is why they don't show up very often because we don't ask. So
yeah, you have to ask.
These guys will just barge right in. Whether you like it or not, and they'll do what they do and try to get you upset. And as soon as they can get you upset, they have some food.
They got you.
Yeah, I think that's their main focus is to feed, is to get their food. I think they can't survive on anything but negative energy. So this is a survival tactic for them.
And it's exactly as the Screw Tape letters talk about.
Mm-hmm.
This is loosh for them.
Mm-hmm.
They feed off of that negative emotional energy. So they have to turn your emotional state negative. That's why paranoid schizophrenics are known as paranoid. They want to make you fearful and anxious and guilty and generate every negative emotion they possibly can. And it doesn't matter.
They have the ability to change the perception, change the person's perception. So you can look at a situation and you're not looking at it in reality. You're looking at it according to what they're doing to you to make you look at something else completely different. It can be something totally benign, and you look at it and feel danger. Well,
and you went through that, Mark. Remember, you were trying to help this gal out, and she would warp your intent and your perception. She would warp it and turn it around at you. So she was perceiving that you were doing something to harm her.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes,
take
and
it,
also
turn it,
the malevolence.
Yes.
Yeah, the malevolence was actually coming from them as well, because not only were they telling her to attack me physically or trying to kill me, they were also twisting her at the same time. And that became very apparent, because when I started studying it, I could see what was happening, and situations would arise where that negative energy would be trying to traumatize me as well. And that's why I had to get away to start with. I had to retreat from it because it was getting too intense, and it was getting into situations where I knew that I was in a lot of danger. I mean, there was a couple of times, I think I told you, Jerry, that I nearly got killed during it. And there was some situations that were horrendous. But yeah, what's also very important, I think, is that the situations with these voices, if you are involved with someone who's got them, can go from normal to absolutely horrendously dangerous in a split second.
Yeah, I've seen that in the prison a number of times. I mean, these prison guards, they call them Kickstarters. You know, they go in there and they start picking on the prisoners because they were macho guys and they had control over these guys. I mean, they only did that once, usually, to a paranoid schizophrenic patient. I mean, I've watched a 100-pound schizophrenic guy throw 3 guards around the inside of a cell like they were popcorn. I mean, they become supernaturally strong. And I think I told you about the one that they pepper sprayed him. They what was it? They shot those electrode things in there with the 50,000 volts. They sicked the dog on him. I mean, this guy was supernaturally. Did I tell you that story, Mark, or not?
Sorry, Jerry. I was answering the comments, and I've got 2 mouses in front of me. I couldn't get the right one. Yeah. What am I doing here? You know, multitasking. You know. Yes, you did, but do tell it again. You know, it's fine, because I think we've got new people on tonight.
Well, this was probably one of the more outstanding cases where now, I didn't witness this, but I knew 2 people real well who did, and both of them were trustworthy, and both of them were officers at the prison in that jail I worked at. We were talking one day about this stuff. So they were in the main big prison in Florence, and here was a psychotic inmate, maybe 180 pounds, 190 pounds. That they were trying to move to another cell. So they do like they normally do, go up to the cell. Okay, cuff up, we're taking you to another cell. And this guy goes, screw you, I ain't going nowhere. And they go, cuff up, or we're going to go get the pepper spray. And he goes, eat crap and die, man. You could jump in a lake, come in and get me. And they went, okay, we're going to go get the pepper spray. And they had these quart cans of pepper spray. They were like, the size of a quart of milk jug. So they went and they got a couple of these things, and that stuff is nasty stuff. I mean, I don't know if you ever had a taste of that, but it doesn't take very much to bring you into tears and agony. They got 2 cans of this, and that prisoner saw him coming, so he wrapped a towel around his head. And he got up on his bed, and they just let him have it. They drenched the inside of that cell with pepper spray. Yeah, no normal prisoner could deal with that. They'd be on the ground crying and whining, and it's just awful, powerful, nasty stuff. It just burns. It's like fire burning your skin. And they drenched him with it, and then he took the towel off his head, and they said, okay, come on out. And he said, screw you, come in and get me, you bunch of weenie buzzards. And started cussing at him and mocking him, and they went, what's with this? So they said, you come on out of there. Now, they could have just turned off the water to his cell and not fed him. He would eventually come out of there, but no, they had to do their macho crap. So they went and they got the what do they call them? Those guns, that stun guns, that they shot it was a wire and an arrow that kind of went in, and then they deliver 50,000 volts of electricity with a lot of amperage. And they got 2 of those things, and they shot him with the first one, and they pulled the trigger, and he just stood there quivering like, but he wouldn't go down. And that would have normally brought the biggest inmate to the ground. It would have just knocked him flat. And this guy's standing there just quivering. So they got a second one. They shot him with that. And here they are pumping him one after another. They did it 13 times while one gun was discharging and the other one was charging, and they just bam, 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 bam. By then the warden came down, and he's looking at this. And after the 13th time, he said, well, they're going to get me for cruel and unusual punishment. We better stop doing that. Go get the dogs. So the prisoners they were really afraid of the dogs, because those things, they were like wolves, man. They just tear you to pieces. And they were trained to do that. So they went and got the dog, and this guy's sitting on his bed, and they said, okay, come out of there. We're going to sick the dog on you. So he goes, come in and get me, you bunch of pansy waste. And he's cussing them and mocking them. And, so they slid the door open of the cell, the front bars, just long enough for the dog to get in. And this guy's sitting on the bed. The dog runs into the cell and goes to jump on him. And he throws up his arm in front of his face like this. And the dog just, bam, clamps on and drives his teeth right down to the bone. And the guy grabs the dog, and he pulls the dog up to his face, and he goes, sit. And he looks the dog right in the eye, and the dog friggin' sits. It doesn't let go of his arm, but it sits. So it sits down, and the guy starts petting it and kind of going, nice puppy, nice puppy. And they're all outside the cell. I mean, he's gushing blood. They're all looking in there like, what the hell is happening? They just couldn't believe it. So the dog was tied to a rope, and they all pulled the rope and pulled him out of the cell. I mean, the dog was clamped on. They just pulled him out of the cell, and then they beat the crap out of him. But that just goes to show you that these guys can become supernaturally strong. And I remember questioning one devil worshiper once. I mean, this guy gave me the willies. I didn't want to get in too deep with him, because I really didn't want to know what he was doing. But what fascinated me about him is that I knew he was hearing voices. I knew he was psychotic. He was labeled schizophrenic, but he didn't have the same affect. He wasn't depressed. He was more like that movie where they had the puppet, that strange puppet. His affect was just real strange, but it wasn't without energy. It was like this howdy-doody kind of affect. And I was curious about that. So I asked him, are you hearing voices? And he goes, yeah, I hear them sometimes. And I said, well, do they drain your energy? And he goes, no, there's times where they give me energy. And that's the first time I heard that. And I said, well, what do you do with it? Well, they give me tasks to do. And I'm like, and I used the energy for those tasks. And I didn't want to go into what tasks those were. But he told me that he could spiritually leave his body, and he could go to different cells at the Florence prison was like, I don't know, maybe 100 miles from our prison complex. And he could visit certain inmates in those cells. So that was freaky. And I asked him, who gives you the energy? And he goes, Lucifer gives me the energy. And I said, well, is that so? I said, well, what does he look like? And he said he was beautiful. He said he is just absolutely beautiful. And that took me back, because I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting the horns and the fangs and all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, really? And he goes, yeah, really. And so, yeah, they were also using psychotic patients as torpedoes in the prison. They would get somebody who was put on meds to reduce the voices, and the gangsters would take those meds and wouldn't let them take them. And then they would start telling this guy, hey, this guy on the other gang, man, he's going to kill you. You better do something about it. I've heard him say he's going to kill you. And all these other guys come up, yeah, he's going to kill you. If you don't do something about it, he's going to kill you. So, they'd use them like torpedoes. And then the psychotic guy would go attack that other gang member. you know, and then they go, well, he's crazy. Oh, we just lock him up. You know, so the gangs would use psychotic prisoners in that manner. But yeah, they become supernaturally strong. They become super furious, and like you were saying, Mark, it happens instantaneously. It just boom, it just explodes. It's like a firecracker goes off in your face. So you have to be careful when working with some of these guys, especially when the biggest thing that will upset them, the thing that will set them off consistently, is when you start telling the patient that they are energetic parasites. They will go off every single time when you bring that up. So you have to be careful there because it gets very dangerous. You have to know who you're working with and how far you think you can trust them. And so you don't want to be hitting everybody with that.
Well, the last thing they want is to be discovered. That's what
Yes.
they fear the most. So,
Discovered and to know that they are energy parasites. Matter of fact, I had some patients tell me or the voices in some patients when I was talking to the voices, that they told me that if they were discovered, they were punished. You know, they aren't supposed to be discovered. And I don't know how many
Yeah,
patients.
that's really interesting, Jerry. Like a hierarchy of demons. I mean, this
Yes.
is kind of belief in some of these systems,
mhm.
like this in this Kabbalistic system. Kabbalah came out, the Langdok, in about 1275, I think, and it's something that I don't have much time for, and I think is based on a false premise. A lot of people really like it. They get it's very fashionable. You get these idiots like Madonna talking about it when they don't
Oh,
really know
boy.
much about it. But yeah, I know. Sorry to bring that up. But the thing is that what's interesting about it is that this idea of having these 72 demons, it was the idea of having these 72 demons that this King Solomon was meant to have been able to control. And they put them into basically be able to put them into containers. Now, the reason I brought that up is because you gave a good analogy of that, in that you imagined these things or you projected them as dropping straight down into a sealed box. Tell us about that. That was an interesting point.
Yeah, it was one of the experiments I was running myself with these things, and it appeared that what happened in the mental world there with the patient, that I could project thoughts in there without even talking. So what I started experimenting with was when patients began hearing voices, I needed some way to shut those voices up, especially working in the ER, because they didn't want you really doing any kind of therapy in the ER. They wanted you in there to get those patients out, to either get them back onto the street, get them with their family, send them to a mental health center, or send them to the psych hospital. But the doctors didn't like psych patients. They didn't understand them. They didn't know what to do with them. So they would call us and said, get this guy out of my ER. And they were constantly flooding the ER. And there were some that we had to release home. And I had to be real careful with this to judge which ones could handle this information. But the ones that I thought could, I would take the time to try to give them as much information as I could so they would have something to fight back with. And one of the things that I found was that soon as I started trying to give them this information, that the voices would kick up and drown me out. That they would get super loud. And the medications would shut the voices down. They would shut them up or quiet them. But most of the guys coming into the ER, they weren't medicated, or they were just given some anti-anxiety, something to calm them down temporarily. But I needed a way to shut the voices up so I could get this information to the patient if I knew he was going to be released back out to either a mental health center, his family, or somewhere outside the hospital. So what I would imagine was I'd imagine an explosion of white light inside their head that would blast these voices out outside of their head. And then I'd vividly imagine this net of white light that would drag over them and then seal them into a box of white light that was 3 feet thick. And I'd imagine that very vividly. And what was interesting is that the ones who were suffering physical symptoms because of the voices, who were anxious or sweating or saying they had a headache or they were moving around and they couldn't stop, that would all stop when I put those voices in that box. Imagine them in the box. And what surprised me is they would talk through that box. So even though the physical things had stopped with the patient I was working with, they could still hear the voices talk through that box of light. So what I would do is now this all sounds psychotic. I mean, any psychiatrist would juice me up right now. You know, it's like, oh man, he's a lunatic. Yeah, but this happened. So, and it happened repeatedly. So I'd imagine duct tape being around the head and the mouth of the voices. And then one day when a patient told me, I'd ask him, okay, they shut up? And he goes, yeah, they shut up, but now they're going like somebody who had tape around their mouth. So you can project into their minds and you can affect the voices in that way. And I would temporarily shut the voices up all the time, you know, and then turn to the patient and said, any psychiatrist ever been able to do that for you? And they'd go, oh, no. And then they would listen. That got their attention. When they found that somebody could shut these things up, they would listen. You know, and that's what you needed to do, because the voices the entire time are trying to drown you out. They don't want you giving this patient any information that is going to be used against them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that, you know, because I think this awareness of having the energy field, you can start picking up this stuff and using it. And that kind of visualization I've used myself, and it is helpful. It's helpful because it removes it from your energy field. So
well, it's temporary.
Yeah, yes.
They will eventually break free of that and come back. But
yes.
it allowed me to get the information I needed to the patient who normally the voices would have drowned it out. Yeah, and then I had to be real careful about the order in which I gave them this information. You know, I go, well, start with, well, have the voices ever done anything good for you? You know, have they ever done anything positive for you? Have they helped you in any way? And a number of the drug addicts would say, yeah, they'd tell me where to get drugs, when to be there, where it was. They'd always help me get drugs, or they'd tell me which houses to rob, whether the people were awake, and where to go hide after I got out of there. And they thought that was great. You know, that was very useful to them. But in the end,
at the end of the day, what it is, Jerry, isn't it? They're being directed.
Yeah.
So they're being directed by these thoughts. I just wanted to get back to this point, where it says, remember, it can be extremely helpful for the person to talk with their voices if it doesn't take over everything else. Well, it will. That's the whole point, isn't it? I think you should address that. That's in this newsletter. And refer back to it. It's the National Paranoia Network, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what Mark's talking about. Is one of the things in this newsletter for the Hearing Voices National Paranoia Network thing, where they said it could be extremely useful to talk to these voices. No, these things are relentless. They are not going to stop. You can carry on all the conversations you want with them, but they're going to direct you in a negative direction. They're going to do whatever they can to turn your emotional state negative so they can drain you. So what do you think about that point, Sherry? Are you there? What, she turned off her microphone?
Yeah, maybe she's making some notes or something.
I don't know.
Well, we have been going for quite a long time, but
maybe she could
find it interesting. Yeah, we've covered quite a bit of ground here, and we've gone over some anecdotal stuff. And this is going to be a kind of regular thing where we interchange ideas. In the next one I do with Jerry, I think we'll get into more kind of questions. If people have got questions that they want to ask, actually send them in by email, and we can have a roundup and we can bring those things in, because I love talking about this stuff. I've been letting Jerry and Sherry talk tonight because this is kind of their platform for getting this stuff out, and it needs to be out there as much as possible. And I think it does tie into a much bigger picture of what's going on. And yes, it's many different levels of it, from ghosts to people with negative attachments to demonic entities. And there is a hierarchy within all this stuff. I don't want to get too much into that, because I think then you start getting into enabling it all with this kind of idea that magicians could read the universe and all this sort of stuff, all this ancient sort of stuff I used to read years ago, which I don't think is actually that helpful, because once you start going into all this hierarchy of demons, then it can be slightly missing the point. It's how you deal with these entities when you have to. And also, I think it's a really good point that most people have experienced these terrible thoughts, and they're so out of character. And where do they come from? That's the point. Where do they come from? They're not yours, because you wouldn't think that, would you? But you get these terribly awful thoughts to do something really horrible. And that's them. Definitely. These are intrusions into your energy field. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's pretty clear. Almost everybody experienced that. I was talking to a preacher once who was standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and the voices were telling him, jump, go ahead and jump. You know, same thing. There was a nurse I talked to. She was on like the 5th floor of a parking garage, and she was walking toward her car, and all of a sudden these thoughts come in like, yeah, go jump. You know, and it's not something that, you know, where it's an intrusive thought that's so bad that you normally would not have it on your own. I mean, it just barges into your consciousness, and it just startles you. You know, it's not your thought, but then you think, well, if it's not mine, who else is it? Because we're taught that all our thoughts are who we are, and until people wake up to that, they have to understand that they are not their thoughts to get to the next level. And here's society, you know, turn on the television and it's, yeah, you're this, you're that, you know, it's always focus outside. You know, nothing is happening outside. It's all happening in here. I mean, everything happens in here. You know, you're responsible for it. Yeah. But
yes, I think that's a good point, Jerry. You are responsible for it. And if this sort of thing happens to people, they have to be very vigilant. And I think that this other problem is the acquiescing to this through drugs and alcohol. And I think you made this point in that first interview we did, and I've seen this. Methamphetamine, crack, is a gateway to it. These people become haunted. They become minor demons. They are not themselves anymore. They are like a kind of living dead. They're a shell that's got an addiction. But what's inside it is crazy. I mean, I was with someone walking down a street in London one night, and this woman was high on crack, and it was demonic. She was going to stab this girl, and she would have done it. And this is a really good point, I think, that you brought up, and also things like the shadow people that these people on methamphetamine see, and the tree people. Go into that. That's really interesting.
Okay. Yeah, there was a period of time where I was still kind of, it was my last days at the prison, you know, maybe 3/4 of a year or something like that, where all of a sudden the prisoners started talking about the shadow people or the tree people. And every time I hear something like that, you know, my ears went up and I'm like, oh, well, what's with that? What? And it wasn't just one of them. It was a lot of them. And I'm like, well, what are they? What do they look like? What do they do? And I start questioning them. And I, you know, I never fully believed just one story. I would start asking others that, well, have you ever heard of this? Have you ever experienced this? And then it came in story after story after story. Apparently they were all talking about whatever the same phenomena here. So it started out with the ones who were using amphetamine, and the prison was full of prisoners who had gone psychotic on amphetamine. And a lot of them started off with Ritalin, and then just kept jacking it up. Ritalin or what is the other one that starts with an A? It's on the tip of my tongue. Adderall. Right, so they prescribed that for ADHD, and you know it works if you hold it at a certain level, at a low level. But these guys just kept going. And I'd ask them, I'd say, well, the Ritalin helped you concentrate like you couldn't ever before, that calmed you down. It did what it was supposed to do. And you just kept pushing it. Why did you do that? Why did you push it and then start using meth on the streets? And they go, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, the prison was full of meth addicts, and they were seeing these shadow people. And I started questioning them about the shadow people. And I said, well, did they ever talk? No. And they appeared like 3-dimensional black shadows that were darker than the rest of the room. And they weren't always humanoid shape. Most of the time they were in humanoid shape. They could go through walls. You could see them on the walls. They would appear, they seemed to be watching the prisoner. They would just stand there and watch in the dark or move around in the dark, and which kind of freaky. But they said they never spoke. And I went, well, that's odd. And I remember talking to one patient. I said, well, they were telling me they can go through things. And this person told me they went through them, and they could feel the shadow person as it walked through them. And it just went it went through them and walked right through and out the other side and walked around the room. So I'm like, yeah, they're all reporting the same thing. They're all, scores of them. They're all saying the same thing about these things. And all of them for a long time were saying they didn't say anything. They didn't speak. They weren't like the voices that talked to them. They didn't speak at all. They just showed up. And a lot of schizophrenics were also seeing these things along with the meth addicts. So I don't know. They were associated somehow, but they weren't the same thing. And I didn't understand what the shadow people were or what they were doing, except scaring these people. They didn't ever seem to jump on them or drain them. I didn't hear any consistent reports of them feeling drained, but they would scare them. And then I asked if they ever saw any facial features. They never saw any facial features until one day some guy said, I saw his eyes. And I said, well, what color were they? And they said they were lime green. So then I started asking other prisoners, have you ever seen their eyes? And yeah, there were a lot of them that saw the eyes. They were either lime green or red, not good colors for eyes. Yeah. And I used that as a clinical marker. The guys who saw the eyes were in much worse shape than the guys who didn't. Which was odd.
And that's really interesting stuff, Jerry. Yeah, I mean, we've been going now for just over 2 hours, so wow. I think we should probably get onto the book and then wrap it up. Just give a bit of info in the book and get Sherry back on. Are you there, Sherry?
I'm here.
Well, where'd you go? You disappeared.
My contractor was here, and I had to say he was leaving, and I had to say goodbye.
Okay, so let me blow through these things real quick. With we're talking back again to the National Paranoia Network. It says encourage the person to set limits with their voices. No, they're not going to respond to limits. Only listen at set times. No, that's not going to work. You can't control when they're going to speak to you. They'll speak to you when they feel like it. That ain't going to cut it.
And we know that if a person tries to ignore them, they get louder.
They get louder consistently. Mm-hmm. Encourage the person to challenge the truth of what they say. That's right on. We know that works. They say sometimes they lie. No, most of the time they lie. And if they're not lying, they're tricking you into something that's going to get you into trouble.
That's right.
And jump in, Cherry, on any of these. Encourage the person to join a group and share their experiences with others. Yes, but in the group, because other people aren't going to understand this. They're going to see them as weird and judge them and be afraid of them, and they'll lose their friends if they tell their parents, which the parents need to know. The parents are going to take them to a psychiatrist. If they tell a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist is going to keep filling them with drugs until they're so hungover and doped up that they say, oh yeah, the voices don't bother me anymore. I still hear them. They're still there, but they don't bother me because I can't think straight, because I can't see straight. And I'm just relieved of the burden of consciousness.
Well, one of the nice things about the Hearing Voices group that Jerry and I started, is that we send them we have a questionnaire for them to fill out before they join. So not just anybody can join. And so once they're in the group, these people all hear voices, or they're physicians who are working with Jerry or wanting to work with Jerry, have discovered that there's something odd going on and they're not hallucinations. So they've discovered that. And then, but the other people who are in this group, they exchange their experiences with one another with comfort. They're very comfortable because they know that everybody there hears voices. And so they help each other, which is wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll say this works or that works, or there's odd things like I'm talking to one gal now that uses the Tesla violet ray, and she says that calms her down, and that the voices don't like that. Apparently, I'm still working with her, but apparently that has some effect on the voices. And there's other people who came up with novel ideas that have experimented with ways to get with them. So they're sharing these things with each other. But you don't want to be talking to just anybody about these voices, because they're going to haul you up to a psychiatrist and juice you up, or think you're weird, or stay away from you, or avoid you. They won't understand. They don't have that experience. They've never had that experience, and they're going to think you're nuts or crazy.
They're not like you, Mark, who actually got in there and tried to understand. Most people are not like you.
No,
Yeah, well, I think that it's been a long journey. And when I came across Jerry's work, it was that Dr. J show. I think it was called Demons Are Real.
Yeah, with Robert Stanley.
Robert Stanley, that's right, because you're Dr. J, right? Because I didn't know who Dr. J was. I thought, who's Dr. J? I've got to get in touch with Dr. J. This is brilliant, And then my friend Kevin knew you through Off the Left Eye, which is the Emanuel Swedenborg channel. So then we got into contact, and we had a very long Skype conversation. But no, this stuff is so interesting to me. And I want to carry it on, say maybe once a month we can do something on this sort of subject, but broaden it out, because it does carry into a lot of different areas. And the sort of esoteric part of it I find quite interesting. The historical part, because it actually ties in so much to what's going on at the moment. I mean, this is mind virus that's hit the planet, and these people that we're seeing a lot of people who are possessed. I mean, and in actual fact, television possesses people. I'm not talking about the sort of kind of intense demonic possession that we're talking about here. I'm talking about it possesses people's minds. Their minds are not their own. They're unable to think. And television is a negative influence. Yes. So there's so many of these negative influences around.
That's and a lot of it programs.
That's why they call them programs. You're being programmed. Yeah, turn off those damn television sets, man. Don't watch anything negative. Like I'm saying, the mainstream media sounds just like an attack of these psychotic voices. You turn them on, it's the same thing. I mean, you can't tell the difference between voices attacking a schizophrenic and what these mainstream media idiots are saying out there. No,
that's right. But I think it lowers everything. It lowers your kind of your energy field, all this stuff.
Oh,
because basically, if you're when I was trying to deal with this stuff, I was feeling so worn out. And I felt as though I was vulnerable to it, because I couldn't you have to get your energy back up again. It's very important. Yeah.
You were being drained, and I ran into that when I was working with these guys in the prison and fishing around their heads. If I worked with more than 2 in a day, I would come back totally drained, and I had no idea why. I just limited the number I would work with in a particular day. Otherwise, I couldn't get anything done when I got home. I was totally drained. So they were getting you, they were getting me. Sherry knows what it's like for them to drain. But here's another last one. One of the last ones here says, some people hold up a mobile phone when talking to their voices. They say this is a great way to normalize the experience. What do you think about that, Sherry?
I think it's a great way to hide the experience, not normalize it. You know, 'cause that way you don't seem like some weirdo talking to yourself. You're just
Right.
talking on the phone. So that, I think that's what they're doing.
Yeah, so, but they're still encouraging them to talk to the voices. You know, they have to stand up to the voices. They can't just let them be run over. They have to stand up and put up a fight. Because
And the
nobody's going to do
way
it
to
for them.
find it is not to get angry, not to have fear,
But
but
to
to
resist.
flat out just say, don't even resist, because that's a negative energy. So you just say, that's a lie, you know, and confront them with that's a lie without getting angry with, because a lot of people, they get angry with these voices because, you know, it gets them upset. Just go away, get out of my life. This is whatever. And that doesn't work, because that's putting out more negative energy, and they'll eat that up, literally. So you just say, that's a lie.
Well, that's resistance. That's not taking what they're doing passively. That's
All right.
resistance.
Okay. I'll agree with that.
Okay.
But if you just resist
No,
without
you
confronting
can't just
them,
resist, because they'll get stronger.
that's a form of negative energy, and they will eat that up. I guarantee you.
All right. So, and let me say, remind the person that often what the voices say is symbolic rather than literal. And with delusional disorders, it might be, but with the voices, it's not symbolic. They're attacking the person. They're running them down. They're creating negative emotional energy. They're after that person, and if they could kill them, that's wonderful. And that's one thing that I never fully understood, because if they kill the person, and the suicide rate for schizophrenics is 5 times that of the normal population.
Well, I'm sure that if they found that some person that being symbolic made them have negative emotions, then they would use that. They'll use whatever they need to use to get the person to change their emotional state.
And telling them to kill themselves when they're depressed causes a lot of negative emotional energy to be generated. I mean, when you're thinking about killing yourself, there's a lot of negative emotion generated there. And that's one of the things they do commonly. Now the psychiatrist will react like a pig stuck in the butt with a hot poker when a patient tells him, yeah, the voices are telling me to kill myself. They'll lock him down, juice him up, don't let him out of suicide watch until he says, oh, I'm not suicidal anymore. They react to them as if they're real when they're telling the patient to kill himself. But other than that, they're just hallucinations. They don't want somebody killing themselves on their watch.
The approach is not only entirely inconsistent, it's laughably wrong in a way, because it's the same in a lot of academic fields. And this is a problem. And of course, the system has created this kind of reinforcement of the academic opinion. So in other words, it's the same as dealing with, I suppose you think Elvis lives on the far side of the moon if you think the voices are real. It's right. This kind of thing, just the ad hominem attack, and it's very, very tiresome. And there's nothing more tiresome than those who will not listen. And that is a big problem, right. Because we have a society of people who not only do not listen to information, but they don't listen to each other. So how can they learn anything? And that's what we're here for, really. It's a kind of school of thought. And a school of thought is a good thing as long as it's good thought and it's there for the benefit of all. And it's not communitarianism, it's not communist, and it's not what's going on in the UK, and it's not what's happening to ideologically subverted Britain, which is itself a mind virus. Yeah. So do you want to just mention the book again and where people can get the book, Jerry, before we wrap up?
Okay. Here, let me see if I can get this up here. This is where it is, and you can get it on Amazon or Lulu. And this will help families understand what's going on with their loved ones. If you didn't understand what's going on, you will after you read this. And it'll give you some valid pointers as to what these things are, how they operate, and what you can do about them. And there's a summary of Sherry's That's a Lie program in here. There's a summary of the works of Swedenborg. What you need to know about what they really are and how the ivory tower has been taken over by, big pharma to generate money, and they're not looking for a cure. They're not looking for a cure. Matter of fact, in the U.S., they did worse than that. Well, what they did is manipulated the statistics from about in 1980. They did a survey. There were like 2 million schizophrenics in the U.S. So they got criticized. The National Institute of Mental Health got criticized for not spending enough money on research into schizophrenia. So what they did is they took a small coarse sample, and they left out all the schizophrenics in prison. They left out the ones who were at home. They left out the homeless. They left out a whole bunch, and they reduced the number of schizophrenics in the United States from 2 million to like 113,000 or something to that effect. And all of a sudden they're spending a tremendous amount of money on schizophrenia. So they're not looking for an answer. They're not looking for a cure. They don't make any money from curing these people. They make money off their misery and suppressing the symptoms. And then they insist there is no other way. And we're here to tell you there is a cure and there is a way, and you can find it in this book, and you can find it on our website. Sherry built a website for us, jerrymarzinsky.com. And hers is keyholejourney.com. And we have papers, we have videos. There is a cure for paranoid schizophrenia. And both of us have seen it. Sherry cured herself. And I've seen a number of patients respond positively and either weaken their voices or completely cure themselves with the information we're providing. And it costs nothing. You don't have to buy drugs. You don't have to destroy your peripheral nervous system. You don't have to put up with this crap from the psychiatric mafia and big pharma that are poisoning you with these drugs. Not to say they're not useful, because those drugs can be used to suppress the voices until you can get through to them with the information that Sherry and I are bringing forward. There are a lot of patients that are so far gone that without these medications, that if you don't know how to get rid of the voices yourself, you can't reach them. The voices will just drown you out. And that's where the medication
and I think another point, Jerry, is that this person didn't know what they were and couldn't. It's a very simple thing. When I just said, it's not you. It's not you. And she then said, no, it's not me. You're not me. And that was the point where things started to change. It was a bit of a long process, but I reinforced it with the things that you've been talking about, and that's part of the whole thing that you and Sherry have been doing for years. And I'm getting a bit tired now, so I'm going to sign off in a minute. I'm doing so many shows this week. I'm on RBN, which is Republic Broadcasting Network. Do tune into that at 8 p.m. It's great to get the American perspective, and I give them the perspective from here. And it's a good station. So it's RBN Republic Broadcasting News, 8 p.m. 9 p.m. or 9:30 maybe. Depends on the guest and how busy we are. At 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday, we do this live stream. Then on Sunday, it's 9 p.m. All available at windowsontheworld.net. So,
okay,
Jerry,
which one has the running commentary? Which one has the running commentary that we can join in on?
Oh, there's a chat box, and it's on YouTube. So if you're looking at it on YouTube, you can see the chat box. Yeah.
But is it live or not live?
It's live. Yeah.
At what time? 8 o'clock Wednesday.
Oh, sorry. Are you talking about RBN or now? We are live now at this minute.
Oh, okay.
Yes, 8 p.m. Well, it's 8 p.m. UK time. You're 8 hours behind, so it's 2 o'clock Central time. So. Yeah, basically 8 hours. So it will be 12 o'clock your end, I think. You're 8 hours behind? No. At 12 a.m. midday.
On Wednesday?
On Tuesdays and Thursdays. Wednesdays, Wednesdays, 9 p.m. live, Windows on the World. And then it's on our Windows on the World YouTube channel and on the Windows on the World website. Sunday, 9 p.m., windowsontheworld.net. So there's 4 shows a week. Go to the website. They're all on there. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. All right. We'll figure it out, I guess.
Yeah. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8 p.m. UK time, RBN, Republic Broadcasting Network, Windows on the World. Wednesday, 9 p.m., Windows on the World YouTube channel live. Sunday, 9 p.m., Windows on the World. Yes.
Okay.
Bit of a choice there, but that's because we started doing a radio show first.
And they have the running chat on all these?
Yes, there's a chat box on windowsontheworld.net for the Sunday show. RBN has its own chat. There's a Windows on the World Chatango. Oh, it sounds really complicated when we're talking about it like this, but it's all on the website, windowsontheworld.net. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, thanks for having us on.
That's great, Jerry. We'll do it again in a few weeks' time. Thanks, Sherry, and stay in touch and keep sending me anything that you may think's of interest and vice versa.
Okay. Yeah, I thought you were so busy. I kind of hesitated to send you some of the stuff that was happening over here, but I'll restart.
No, that's great, Jerry. Yeah, it's really good. I mean, I put it all in folders. I don't have time to cover everything on the shows. And I'm also doing a lot of research and writing and making this film at the moment. So it's pretty full on, but it's all good. I'm researching all the time, really.
I just
so
want
it all
to
helps, yeah.
In closing, I'd like to say that keep in mind that we're actually in a spiritual battle more than we're in a physical battle.
Yes.
I think we can overcome this situation that we're in right now worldwide, if we get our spiritual selves in a high enough state, because the intention changes things in the material world. So if we send out love and we have we keep our spirits up regardless of what happens, I think it will actually change things if enough of us do it.
I agree.
It's taking personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Really, that's what it's about, because we're being forced into a hive mind, and a hive mind basically abjures from responsibility, and that's no good. You have to be responsible. Communitarianism and communism is all about people acquiescing to the state, and that is pretty demonic in my opinion. That's where a lot of the problems really start. I'm just going to give you a bit of something from the Nag Hammadi scriptures here, and this is from page 399 of the Nag Hammadi, which is the modern translation, and translators do no justice at all, in my opinion, to a lot of this stuff, but I think this is a reasonable translation. It says, the imitator reigns over the earth and leads people astray. Certainly doing that at the moment. This is from the wisdom of Jesus Christ. He says, I have come from the first, who was sent to reveal to you the one who is from the beginning. I have given you authority over everything as children of the light, to trample on their power with your feet. This is what he said, and then he disappeared. Now, got a couple more here. This is quite interesting, and it's very prescient to what's going on at the moment. It's called The World Will Be Desolate. And it says, people will prefer darkness to light and death to life. No one will gaze up to heaven. The godly will be considered mad, and the impious will be honored as wise. Well, that's never been as true as it is now.
Agree.
Certainly not. Yeah. The coward will be considered strong, and the good person will be punished as a criminal. Well, I think I know all about that. I'm going to take honorary victim status on that one. Concerning the soul and things of the soul, and whatever has to do with immortality, these things will not only be considered to be ridiculous, as you were saying tonight, Jerry, they will also be regarded as being nothing. In other words, swept aside. Believe me, people like this will expose themselves to the ultimate danger of their souls. And that's what a lot of these people are doing.
Yes.
So I think that's quite a good place to leave it. But, oh, yeah, just one last thing and one more thing. Yes, a new law will be established, COVID-19, for instance. And the good spirits will depart, but the wicked angels will remain among people and will be with them and lead them recklessly to what is evil and into godlessness, war, and pillage by teaching them things contrary to nature, which is exactly what these globalists are doing at the moment. In those days, the earth will be unstable and people will not sail the sea or discern stars in heaven or even be able to get on a plane, right? Every sacred word of God will become silent and the air will become unhealthy. This is the senility of the world. Godlessness, dishonor, contempt for noble words. The first and only deity has seen what has happened. He formulated his plan, a good plan against the chaos. He eradicates error and eliminates evil, sometimes drowning it in a flood, at other times burning it in a conflagration, and still other times subduing it with wars and plagues, until he brings of this work, and this is the birth of the world. The restoration of nature, of the pious and the good, has no beginning, even as his nature, which is his will, has no beginning. God's nature is will, and his will is the good. So, to summarize, so those who are not filled with awareness and understanding of the situation they are in will assist it. They will participate in their own demise and oversee the demise of others. Yeah, just a bit of good stuff to finish off with there.
Well, we're in, according to legend, we're in the 6th extinction right now. And so we're going to, and each extinction was finalized differently and had a different cause so far as we know. But this one is up to us as human beings, whether we go extinct or not. So, I think we can win if enough of us wake up. And I see a lot of people waking up who I never would have thought would be waking up.
Yeah, people are waking up at a horrendous rate right now. And especially due to people like you, Mark, because this stuff would never get out over the mainstream media. They would never permit it.
No, and that's why I'm not in the mainstream media, because I'm doing something interesting. I mean, I know people who have worked in it. And I've got comedic anecdotes to that. For instance, I know one of the main anchor news people at ITN, met him in a bar through a friend one night, started talking, and he said, "Oh, I could never do what you do. I tried to get the truth out." Well, clearly you don't, because you work for ITV, side issue. But the point was that I said, they were talking about prostate cancer. And I said, well, I know somebody who's cured themselves recently of that, and they both turned around, him and his friend, as though I'd absolutely affronted everything they believed in, and go, "That's an insult to the dead." I said, "No, it's not. It's helping the living." It's kind of incredible, right? And so what happened was, I said, no, it was prostate cancer, and this person managed to, he was at stage 4, and it was diagnosed. He had 3 months to live. And so what he did was he took a mixture of ginger, graviola, and nettle tea. Oh, that sounds new age. Not really. It's ginger is an absolute purger of bacteria, basically. Ginger is fantastic. I know that for myself. But basically, it was crystallized ginger. It was just an idea a friend of his had. Crystallized ginger, this graviola, nettle tea, no particular order, just taking it all the time. Within 2 weeks, he was completely clear. And they both attacked me. That was Chris Choi from ITN and his friend. They absolutely called me a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist. The next day, I got my friend who'd actually helped this person through. And he said, "Yes, Chris," because I got his card, This was before they told me I was a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist, obviously. And he said, "Well, like you, Chris, I'm a skeptic, but it worked. If you want some more information, get in touch." Did he get in touch? No, because he's got his nose in the trough and they don't want to know. So that's why they work in the mainstream, because they don't want to know. They're communitarians. They're basically that they are part of the problem. I know this from very personal experience.
Oh,
I know people join mainstream media and they know nothing about anything and they want to keep it that way.
Yeah. So would you say that was ginger, nettle tea, and something?
Ginger, nettle tea, and graviola, which is something you can buy online. Yeah, it's a herb, so you can just buy it. But it was something that my friend looked up, And they did it, and the fella's still alive. He's fine. But mainstream media doesn't want to know about the cure. They only want to know about the problem.
Well, exactly. There's been cures before, and they've raided the labs. They've shut them down. They've threatened the
Right.
guy who put them out. They've confiscated all his research, and the ones who wouldn't quit, they jailed them.
Or
Well, they're enablers. You see, the thing is that you're talking about the people who are innovators, but the innovators get shut down by the enablers of the system. The enablers of the system don't even know that the system is enabling them to do that, and that is the problem. They have not got their own minds. In a way, they have their own form of spiritual possession, and they're going to have to deal with it. With that, I'm going to say good night. Thanks,
Okay.
Sherry. I'm really sorry. I introduced you as Sherry Swiney, and it's Sherry Sweeney or Sherry Swinney. I think I said it. I've got all three now.
okay.
Sherry Sweeney. Very sorry, Sherry.
Yeah.
I know we talked about that before we went on air. And thanks, Jerry. That's Jerry Marzinski, Sherry Sweeney, and myself, Mark Windows. We're going to be back with more of this in the weeks to come. Hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a long haul. Good night. Join us for RBN, 8 p.m. UK time, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and 9 o'clock at windowsontheworld.net for the Sunday show. Thanks a lot, everybody, and see you soon.
All right. Take care, Mark.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks,
All right.
Jerry.
You're welcome.
Catch you later.